What's that awful stink? Smoke, sweat, shit. King's Landing in short. If you have a good nose, you can smell the treachery too. You've never smelled the city before? I smelled White Harbour. It never stank like this. White Harbour is the King's Landing, as my brother Tyrion is to Sir Gregor Clegane, Stillshanks Walton, and Jaime Lannister. A Storm of Swords Chapter 62, Jaime 7. If any single thing can show us the sheer impact House Targaryen had on the history of Westeros, it's the city of King's Landing, one of the largest and most economically important places in the Seven Kingdoms, becoming the centre of politics in the United Kingdoms that would become Westeros in the wake of Aegon's conquest. King's Landing is not the oldest city, and it would take many years for it to become the most populous, with the likes of Old Town, while bigger and more ancient, by the time of the main book series, only having a fraction of King's Landing's population. But while the likes of Old Town, Lannisport, Duskendale and White Harbour all grew very slowly over thousands of years, King's Landing turned from 3 hills with a fishing village to the sprawling city it is today, in an historical heartbeat of 300 years. Such is the influence of House Targaryen and the sheer investment made into this new capital city. The blood of the dragon very well could have just taken over an existing city or ruled from Dragonstone, but the development of King's Landing was supposed to send a message to all the peoples of Westeros as to what the blood of old Valyria was still capable of. In this mini-series, we'll be taking a deep dive into the history of King's Landing, from the small fishing village to the city that it is at the start of the main books. We will talk about why Aegon chose its location, its early history, the building of the Red Keep and the redevelopments under King Jaehaerys, which truly made King's Landing the city it is today. When Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters landed on the shores of Blackwater Bay as they began their conquest of the Seven Kingdoms, they landed on the very site that would later become the city of King's Landing, the very centre of Targaryen Westeros. As Aegon, his dragons, and small army looked out across the landscape, it would have seemed very different from what we know today. Instead of endless sprawls of streets and buildings, was lush green grass, as far as the eye could see, with 3 tall hills towering above them. Beside the hills was the Blackwater Rush, where the Blackwater River meets Blackwater Bay itself. But this idyllic piece of land was not completely empty. There did exist, near the banks of the river, a small fishing village with a handful of people living there. But here is something that has always struck maesters as a bit odd about the site of King's Landing. It's almost the perfect location to build a settlement. The wide open spaces are perfect for development. The Blackwater River would give fast access to the Riverlands and Blackwater Bay, making it a fantastic trade location. The high hills would make strong defensive locations. In fact, old stone ruins would be found atop each of the 3 hills, but no other sign of development. It's certainly odd that the only meaningful thing that existed before the conquest was this fishing village. One argument put forward was the larger port town of Duskendale to the north, the seat of the Darkling Kings of the Age of Heroes, made the necessity of another large port town in the region redundant. But Aegon the Conqueror did see the potential of this location and chose to use the highest of these hills as the base of his invasion of Westeros. In time, the 3 hills making up King's Landing would bear the names of each of the Targaryen conquerors, the 2 smaller named for Visenya and Rhaenys, and the tallest, the future site of the Red Keep, named for Aegon. There was no one to face Aegon when he landed on the shores of Blackwater Bay, as this area around the Rush had been claimed and disputed by several kingdoms for countless generations, and was currently being disputed by the Storm King Argilac Durrandon and the King of the Isles and Rivers, Harrenhal. But at some time the land had also been the dominion of the Darklings of Duskendale, the Masses of Stonedance, and the many River Kings, including the likes of the Blackwoods, the Brackens, the Fishers, the Hooks and the Muds. Aegon ordered the construction of a crude wooden and earth castle atop what became Aegon's High Hill at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. After defeating a dozen castles in the vicinity of Blackwater Bay, Aegon commanded the defeated lords to attend him at his new Aegonfort. These men laid their swords at the conqueror's feet, and Aegon confirmed them in their lands and their titles. Aegon's knights unveiled the heraldic banner of House Targaryen for the first time, with Visenya placing a crown on Aegon's head, and Rhaenys proclaimed him king of all of Westeros. The swords of those defeated in the burning of Harrenhal and the Field of Fire were too sent to the Aegonfort by wagon, and the Iron Throne itself was created from these melted, broken blades. The Aegonfort itself began as a moat and bailey fort on top of Aegon's high hill, and was relatively hastily built to give Aegon a secure foothold within mainland Westeros. Despite the crude nature of the fort, and being made of only wood, given its location atop Aegon's high hill, it would be very difficult to assault, even for the largest of armies. The small number of men Aegon had command of could easily hold the hill for months, and that's not even considering his dragons. The initial design was quickly replaced with a new log keep, with walls 50 feet high and a cavernous, dark long hall below it. Some say you could hardly see from one end of the Great Hall to the other, through the smoke of the hearths. While the fort was certainly comfortable, and did have a spacious living quarters for Aegon and his sisters, once the conquest was all said and done, the siblings much preferred travelling their new kingdom, or staying at their ancestral seat of Dragonstone. Across from the bailey was a stone-roofed kitchen made of slate, and the growing castle also had a stable and a granary. Its watchtowers were said to be 100 feet tall. As the Aegon fort grew, it gained a barracks and an armory, a modest sept, and later a drum tower with a palisade. Arguably the biggest choice Aegon had when he became High King was where he would rule his new realm from. Some rightly thought and argued he would choose Dragonstone, given its connection to House Targaryen. Some thought the obvious choice would be Oldtown, given it was the largest city in Westeros and the most populous, with it being the centre of the Faith of the Seven. But instead, Aegon chose the wooden Aegonfort and the modest village of King's Landing below its walls, and with that, King's Landing was set on a path of rapid growth and prosperity. The Iron Throne would eventually be installed in the smoky Long Hall, and from then on, King's Landing would grow around it. The Aegonfort was only a tenth as roomy as the older castle of Dragonstone, which was also much more secure and comfortable, and whilst it would stand for 35 years as King's Landing grew below it, the Aegonfort would need to be replaced by something much more permanent. And thus, the dreams of the Red Keep began. The Red Keep had its secrets, known only to the dead. The writings of Maester Gildane, Fire and Blood, the Sons of the Dragon. After Aegon finalised his conquest and was crowned Lord of the Seven Kingdoms in his second coronation at Oldtown, many expected that he would make Dragonstone, or perhaps Oldtown, his new capital. He unexpectedly decided to build his capital in the new growing town around the Aegonfort, the town that had become known to the small folk as King's Landing, given it was the very location Aegon landed the day the conquest began. There was some strong logic to choosing the small town over the more established cities. Namely, these ancient cities were already under the control of houses who had ruled them for thousands of years. It would cause needless tension if Aegon co-opted one of these seats. Also, since King's Landing was more centrally located than any of the other cities, but also not part of the former fragmented kingdoms, it would set the king's seat apart from his new vassals. Aegon correctly foresaw that King's Landing would become a great city, which it did in 10 AC, with it soon going on to surpass the likes of Oldtown and Lannisport. Trade shifted from Duskendale and Maidenpool, and by 25 AC, King's Landing had become the realm's third largest city, ahead of White Harbour and Goldtown. While this was great news for King's Landing, it was less so for the people of Duskendale in particular, who were hit hardest by the decline in trade. The following year, Grand Maester Garwin and Sir Osmond Strong completed the city walls and 7 gates for the 7 gods, and thus the footprint of King's Landing we know today started to become recognisable. The river that had seemed so narrow from a distance now stretched wide as a sea, but the city had grown gigantic as well. Glowering down from Aegon's high hill, the Red Keep commanded the approaches. Its iron-crowned battlements, massive towers and thick red walls gave it an aspect of a ferocious beast hunched above the river and the streets. The bluffs on which it crouched were steep and rocky, spotted with lichen and gnarled, thorny trees. The thoughts of Davos Seaworth, A Clash of Kings, Chapter 58, Davos 3. While the city below grew, so did the Aegonfort atop Aegon's high hill, but the wooden earth castle was hardly a seat fit for a king, and thus in 35 AC, King Aegon made a decision that surprised no one. The royal family would temporarily relocate back to Dragonstone, while the Aegonfort itself was torn down, with a new grand castle to take its place. Despite it being Aegon's decision to build this new castle, it was left to his sister wife, Queen Visenya, and the hand of the king, Alan Stokeworth, to plan this new city and oversee the breaking of ground. Aegon the Conqueror would never see his new castle come to fruition, as he would die 3 years into its construction in 37 AC. The Red Keep was not ready for the coronation of Aegon's son and heir, with the Great Hall itself still very much open to the elements, with the Iron Throne stood alone in the rubble. But after being crowned on Dragonstone, King Aenys would fly on Dragonback to the ruins of the Aegonfort to claim the Iron Throne, with countless small folk watching on. King Aenys, it is said, became obsessed with the ongoing building of the castle and would agree to adopt the small folk's name for it. They had been calling it the Red Keep, due to the red coloration of the stones used in its construction. Like his father, King Aenys too would not see the Red Keep finished, when he died very suddenly in 42 AC on Dragonstone, at the start of the Faith Militant Uprising, an event that would all but stop construction on the Red Keep for the better part of a year. Aenys was succeeded to the throne by his brother, who became known as King Maegor the Cruel, who technically had usurped the throne from his nephew, Prince Aegon the Uncrowned. On Aenys' death, the Red Keep and Sept of Remembrance in King's Landing were seized by the warrior sons and Poorfellows, but control of the city was regained by Maegor, using Balerion the Blackdread to destroy the Faith Militant at the Sept and solidify his rule. Maegor would then take personal charge of the Red Keep's construction in 43 AC when it resumed. Maegor had a vision that went beyond the plans of Aegon and Aenys, feeling the original plans for the Red Keep did not reflect the true power of House Targaryen. He expanded the project by adding a moated holdfast within the walls of the Red Keep, later becoming known as Maegor's Holdfast. While Maegor's Holdfast would be used as apartments for members of the court and even for the royal family at times, its main purpose was for it to become a last line of defense should the Red Keep's huge outer walls be breached. Maegor's most infamous addition was in fact the secret passages, false walls and trap doors introduced all around the castle and the tunnels throughout Aegon's high hill. Before construction was completed, Maegor moved into the Red Keep full time, and it was soon after the new castle saw its first bloodshed, after Prince Viserys Targaryen, the king's nephew, was tortured to death by Tiena of the Tower in 44 AC. Maegor abandoned his nephew's body in the courtyard of the Red Keep. Many members of House Harroway were thrown into the spikes below Maegor's Holdfast. When the king extinguished the family in 44 AC, they would become the first of many to face this fate. Aegon the Conqueror had commanded it built. His son Maegor the Cruel had seen it completed. Afterwards, he had taken the head of every stonemason, woodworker, and builder who had laboured on it. Only the blood of the dragon would ever know the secrets of the fortress the Dragon Lords had built, he vowed. The thoughts of Catelyn Stark, Game of Thrones, Chapter 18, Catelyn 4. The castle itself was finally finished in 45 AC, 10 years after the Aegonfort had first been demolished. To celebrate, Maegor threw a feast for its builders, carvers and stonemasons as an apparent show of gratitude for their hard work over the last 10 years. After 3 days of non-stop feasting, Maegor the Cruel had all of the craftsmen killed, so only he would know the Red Keep's secrets. It is this barbaric action by Maegor that many wrongly believe gave the Red Keep its name, for the blood of the men who had built it, now within the stones themselves. When Maegor the Cruel was found dead on the Iron Throne in 48 AC, one theory would suggest that a stonemason, familiar with the castle's secret passages, had escaped the massacre and assassinated the king. But whatever the truth of the matter is, we shall never know. The morning air was thick with the old familiar stinks of King's Landing. She breathed in the scent of sour wine, bread baking, fish rotting, and night soil, smoke and sweat and horse piss. No flower had ever smelled so sweet. The Thoughts of Cersei Lannister, A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 65, Cersei 2. King's Landing grew from a small fishing village to a bustling port town to a huge city in a historical blink of an eye. Before long, the population of King's Landing overtook the likes of Goldtown, White Harbour and Lannisport, soon becoming the most populous city in the realm during the reign of King Jaehaerys I, the Conciliator. However, King's Landing never overtook Old Town in terms of sheer size. A factor often greatly overlooked in Westerosi history is that while King's Landing is indeed the largest city by population in Westeros, it is still much smaller than even some towns in Essos, such as Celoris and Volontheris, let alone the free cities up and down the Narrow Sea. For a sense of scale, while there are no official numbers in terms of the populations of the cities of Westeros, Tyrion Lannister, who acted as Hand of the King during the events of the main book series, believed that the city had a population of approximately 500,000 people. The issue with how fast King's Landing grew was the lack of planning and forward thinking in its construction. By the time it had grown to the size of a proper city during the reign of King Jaehaerys I, the city itself was a mess of winding alleys and crisscrossing streets on top of one another. It made the city hard to navigate, with the spaces not utilised very well. More than that, however, when compared to the other cities of Westeros, King's Landing was more like a sprawling slum, and not the kind of place fit for the capital of the Seven Kingdoms and the seat of the king. This is something that King Jaehaerys Targaryen, the Conciliator, saw very clearly when he came of age in 50 AC, very much wanting to fix these issues, not just for the vanity of House Targaryen, but to improve the day-to-day lives of the small folk who called this mess of a city home. The first thing the king did was ensure the completion of Maegor the Cruel's Dragonpit, a huge domed building up top Rhaenys' Hill, meant to house the Targaryen dragons while in King's Landing. Some did urge the king to abandon the project, given its negative connection to Maegor the Cruel, but given the sheer amount of gold and resources that had already been poured into its construction, Jaehaerys decided it was best to finish the construction on the Dragon Pit before moving on to the city proper. Jaehaerys had grand plans for the improvement, not just of King's Landing, but the Seven Kingdoms as a whole. And while the royal treasury did indeed have plenty of gold, Maegor's wars and instability had diminished it, and more would be required to achieve the full extent of the king's vision. Thus Jaehaerys turned to the Iron Bank of Braavos to gain the extra funds needed for his improved vision of Westeros. A significant portion of the city was demolished to make way for a new planned city layout that in theory would benefit all of the citizens of King's Landing. Due to the speed of its growth, King's Landing lacked the proper infrastructure of the other cities of Westeros, mostly basic amenities. Thus, the first thing the king installed was a brand new drainage and sewage system to carry waste from the city. Waste management had become a huge issue, with no easy way for the small folk to deal with it. The poorest parts of the city were nothing more than a disease-ridden slum. This new sewage system would prevent this, and in theory, this new King's Landing, from falling into the same state, rather than a network of tight alleys. Streets were widened, with main roads built crossing the whole city. Unlike the smaller streets, the roads were paved with cobblestones and lined with trees and greenery, with countless statues at intersections across the city, even in the poorer areas of King's Landing. In all, this made moving around the city a much more straightforward process. Regardless of the new sewage systems, King's Landing faced an issue all growing cities face sooner or later: a lack of clean drinking water. While King's Landing was located on the north bank of the Blackwater Rush, Septon Bath, the Hand of the King, correctly pointed out the river that was being used as the only source of clean drinking water for the city was a huge problem. Should something happen to it, the people of the city, rich or poor, would go thirsty. However, he was also greatly concerned about the quality of the river water, given how much sewage had already been dumped into it, stating it was only fit for swine and horses to drink from. Thus, many wells were sunk into the city, with even larger ones beyond the walls. Miles of glazed pipes and tunnels would then carry this fresh water into the heart of the city, where it would be housed in huge underground cisterns. This water would be made available at fountains and public squares in order to provide access to clean water to the small folk, free of charge. Much of this focus on providing the small folk with clean drinking water came from King Jaehaerys' sister wife, the good Queen Alysanne. Thus, these public fountains have become known as the Queen's Fountains. King Jaehaerys would fund one more large-scale project, not just to the benefit of King's Landing, but the Seven Kingdoms as a whole, by drastically improving the road network and connecting King's Landing to it directly. Not just making travel across the kingdoms easier, but boosting trade between the kingdoms and bringing the former independent Seven Kingdoms together as one, as Aegon the Conqueror had envisioned. Jaehaerys ordered the construction of the Gold Road and the Rose Road. The Gold Road would connect King's Landing to the west, starting from Lannisport and Casterly Rock. The Rose Road would travel south from King's Landing to Highgarden, where it would then connect to the ancient Ocean Road that travels all the way to Old Town. Finally, Jaehaerys would see the construction of the King's Road, the largest single road in the history of Westeros, extending for almost 2,000 miles from Storm's End through King's Landing to the Wall in the far north. Many of these ancient small pre-conquest roads that already existed would be connected to this huge King's Road. While not as large as the old Valyrian roads in Essos, this new road system with King's Landing at the heart surely did much in establishing it as the centre of Westeros since the Conquest. By the end of King Jaehaerys' reign in 103 AC, King's Landing was not the same city it was when he came to the throne as a child, and had changed dramatically in only 50 years. It was now a place fit to be the seat of House Targaryen. By 103, the footprint of King's Landing is almost the same as it is in 298 AC, at the start of the main book series, with very few minor changes being made to the city layout in the time since. The Dance of the Dragons from 129 to 131 AC will see the Dragonpit turned into a ruin, never to be repaired. To ensure food supply of not just King's Landing, but cities across Westeros during harsh winters or war, in 132 AC, Tywin Lannister, the Hand of the King, ordered construction of huge granaries in all of the major towns and cities in Westeros, with several large ones being constructed in King's Landing. The only other huge structural change King's Landing would see came between 161 and 171 AC, when King Baelor the Blessed ordered the construction of a huge sept on top of Rhaenys' Hill. This mighty construction project would later become known as the Great Sept of Baelor. Aegon the Conqueror had commanded it built. His son Maegor the Cruel had seen it completed. Afterward, he had taken the heads of every stonemason, woodworker and builder who had laboured on it. Only the blood of the dragon would ever know the secrets of the fortress the Dragon Lords had built, he vowed. The Thoughts of Catelyn Stark, A Game of Thrones Chapter 18, Catelyn 4. The Red Keep is an iconic part of what makes King's Landing what it is by the time of the main book series. The whole city lives in its shadow, looming down from Aegon's high hill. It's the very centre of politics in Westeros, the seat of power for the kings of House Targaryen for nearly 300 years. And while from the outside, the huge looming castle, made of red stone, seems an imposing fortress, which it is also a practical and functional building, meant for the powers of Westeros to rule from. Thus, there is a lot more to this castle than you might first expect, more so than the obvious iconic locations, such as the throne room and the small council chambers, with countless forgotten and lesser known areas that have not yet been the focus of the story being told in the main books. So in this video, let's take a closer look at the Red Keep, its layout, and all the lesser known areas of it and how they fit into the wider castle. For the sake of clarity, we'll be looking at the Red Keep after the reign of King Jaehaerys I Targaryen. As for the latter part of the Targaryen era, until Robert's Rebellion, the castle remained largely unchanged. While we know little of the thought process behind Queen Visenya and Hand of the King Alan Stokeworth's vision for the Red Keep, what we can say is that visually it is as distinct as the other great castles of Westeros. Not only does its location on top of Aegon's high hill create an imposing silhouette in the skyline, the red stones stand out dramatically from the pale blue sky, despite looking huge and imposing,
And while yes, the Red Keep is large, it is smaller than the castle of House Stark, Winterfell. It has 7 huge drum towers crowning the ramparts, presumably 7 towers for the 7 aspects of the faith. Traditionally, the heads of those executed in the Red Keep are displayed on the crenelles between the 2 towers that make up the gatehouse for all those entering the castle to see as a warning. The main gate itself is huge and made of thick bronze with a portcullis and a narrow postern door. The immense barbican has the cobbled square in front of it. Behind the walls are small inner yards, vaulted halls, covered bridges, barracks of the city watch of King's Landing, dungeons, granaries, kennels and stables. The Red Keep has serpentine steps, which can be strenuous to climb, given the sheer height of the main building. Maegor's Holdfast, the small council chambers, the Tower of the Hand, the lower bailey, a small sunken courtyard, and the black cells are located below the steps. The Great Hall, with the throne room, is found above the steps, and the outer yard, or ward, is found near the main gate. Also above the steps are the Godswood, the River Walk, the small kitchen, and the pig yard. The Royal Sept and the Maiden Vault are located above the serpentine steps as well. Relics of the Targaryen dynasty, such as dusty black suits of armour and dragon skulls, sit in some corridors. The throne room was a sea of jewels, fur, and bright fabric. Lord and ladies filled the back of the hall and stood beneath the high windows, jostling like fishwives on a dock. The Thoughts of Sansa Stark, A Clash of Kings, Chapter 65, Sansa 8. A case can be put forward that the most iconic part of the Red Keep is in fact the Great Hall, which contains the Iron Throne itself. It sits on a raised iron dais with high and narrow steps. A long carpet stretches from the throne to the hall's great oak and bronze door. The hall is huge, not of course as large as Harrenhal's Hall of 100 Hearths, but still large enough to be able to feast up to 1,000 people with ease, and plenty space nearby for overflow. The hall itself is orientated north to south, with high, narrow windows on the eastern and western walls. Traditionally, the skulls of the Targaryen dragons whom had died at various points once adorned these walls, until King Robert Baratheon had them moved to a cellar and replaced with hunting tapestries at the very start of his reign. There is a tale among the small folk Robert had them ground to dust, but the existence of the dragon skulls in the cellars to this day prove this is just a tale. Located behind the Iron Throne is the King's Door, a private entrance that connects to the private parts of the Red Keep. While it's not common, sometimes the small council conduct meetings inside the throne room, but they are mostly done in the small council chambers. Sansa pulled the hood of her cloak up over her ears and hurried towards Maegor's Holdfast, a castle within a castle where the Queen had promised they would all be safe. The Thoughts of Sansa Stark, A Clash of Kings, Chapter 57, Sansa 5. Maegor's Holdfast is one of the most interesting parts of the castle, given it is a kind of a castle within a castle, a massive square fortress at the very heart of the Red Keep, named after King Maegor the Cruel, who had added it to the construction plan for the Red Keep. The Holdfast lies behind walls 12 feet thick, with a deep dry moat lying below with a bed of formidable iron spikes. Many poor souls have lost their lives to those very spikes. There is a single publicly known way in and out of the Holdfast, a large drawbridge spanning the moat. However, according to some secret tales, there is an egress built at the behest of King Maegor as an emergency escape route. Given the safety the Holdfast provides, the royal apartments are located in Maegor's Holdfast, including the king's own bedchamber. It is also home to its own great hall, known as the Queen's Ballroom, but it is much smaller than the throne room. The more graceful ballroom seats around 100 and has beaten silver mirrors across the walls, which makes the torchlight seem twice as bright. Its walls are panelled with richly carved wood, and it has a gallery above the main floor. High arched windows sit along the southern wall, looking across the castle below. The Holdfast is meant to act as a last line of defence should the Red Keep ever fall. When Cersei looked up, she saw the tower's crenulated battlements gnawing at a hunter's moon, and wondered for a moment how many hands and how many kings have made their home there over the past years. The Thoughts of Cersei Lannister, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 12, Cersei 3. The Tower of the Hand is where the Hand of the King and his retinue reside. The tower's private audience chamber is not as large as the king's, but has Moorish rugs, wall hangings, and golden-tinted round windows that give a sense of splendour, as the Hand would often be entertaining lords and foreign dignitaries in the tower. The bedchamber is said to have a canopied bed and thick carpets on the floors. The room also has a large hearth, which also acts as a small door opening on a passageway known to Lord Varys, the Master of Whisperers, and presumably many Master of Whisperers before him. From this door you can climb down 230 stairs, which lead to the Chamber of the Dragon Mosaic, where half a dozen tunnels meet. Like Maegor's Holdfast, the tower has its own hall, known as the Small Hall. While still being smaller than the Great Hall and the Queen's Ballroom, the Small Hall is still larger than most Great Halls across the realm. It is a long room with high vaulted ceilings and a bench space for around 200. The tower has windows that overlook the Great Yard and the city below. The Red Keep shelters two sorts of people, Lord Eddard: those who are loyal to the realm and those who are loyal only to themselves. Varys the Spider to Eddard Stark, A Game of Thrones Chapter 30, Eddard 7. The keep is home to a large dungeon, which is accessed via the Traitor's Walk, a pathway leading to a small, half-round tower. The top floors hold cells for prisoners kept in a degree of comfort, such as knights or lordlings who might be ransomed, while the entrance to the dungeon itself sits on the ground floor. The floors below contain rooms for the King's Justice, the Chief Jailer, and the Lord Confessor. Maegor the Cruel, who oversaw the completion of the Red Keep, ordered that the dungeons below the squat tower have 4 levels. The top levels have cells with high narrow windows where common criminals are confined together in large open cells. The second level has smaller personal cells without windows for highborn captives not worthy enough for cells in the tower itself. Torches in the halls cast light through the bars, leaving a degree of comfort still. The third cells are the most feared of all the cells in the city, known as the Black Cells, and are smaller than those on the upper level by large degrees. They have doors of wood so that no light may enter them, with many men going mad behind those doors. The lowest level is used for torture, as to keep the sounds of the victims from travelling around the nearby castle. There is a secret path from the lowest level that leads to the Chamber of the Dragon Mosaic below the Tower of the Hand and the banks of the Blackwater Rush. The Red Keep has its secrets, known only to the dead. The writings of Gildane, Fire and Blood, the Sons of the Dragon. The Red Keep and Aegon's High Hill below it have a network of secret passages and tunnels ordered by King Maegor when he came to the throne, while the Red Keep was still being built. This was to enable him to make a quick escape should his enemies ever trap him within the castle. The tunnels are supposedly full of dangerous traps, but how much truth there is to this we do not know, and if they are still active after all this time is another matter altogether. Some tunnels are of stone, while others are simply earth supported by timber. Some of these paths are so small a grown man must crawl through them. Some even pass close to other rooms in the Red Keep, allowing a hidden person to eavesdrop on conversations. It is not known if this was an intended use of the tunnels in Maegor's plans, or happened coincidentally. The bedchambers used by Lord Varys, the Master of Whisperers for King Aerys II and Robert Baratheon, contains a mechanism that causes his stone slab of a bed to float up and reveal a hidden staircase. It is not known, but very likely, that most Master of Whisperers also knew of these tunnels to some degree. One secret passage leads from the bedchamber at the Tower of the Hand to the Chamber of the Dragon Mosaic below it. There is also a secret way to get in and out of the Red Keep onto the cliffs facing Blackwater Bay. Narrow handholds, impossible to see from the ground, have been cut into the very cliff face, so you can climb down to a trail beside the Blackwater Rush. Another passage out of the Red Keep passes by the Cellar of Skulls, in which is kept the skulls of the Targaryen dragons, which leads to the sewer that empties into the river. Maegor's Holdfast is the only building in the Red Keep that has no secret passages that connect to all these secret tunnels. There is one escape door in Maegor's Holdfast, but it doesn't connect to any of the other secret passages in the Red Keep. People familiar with the secret passages include Maegor himself, Cheese of the infamous Blood and Cheese incident, Lord Larys Strong, the Master of Whisperers for King Aegon II, Lord Varys the Spider and his little birds, and Lord Peter Baelish, the Master of Coin for Robert Baratheon. I had no home but the White Sword Tower, Barristan Selmy to Daenerys Targaryen, A Dance with Dragons Chapter 11, Daenerys 2. The White Sword Tower is a slender 4-story structure built into an angle of the castle wall overlooking Blackwater Bay, and is the home of the 7 Knights of the Kingsguard. The first floor contains the common room for the Kingsguard, known as the Round Room, and as the name of the tower suggests, it's circular and white. White wall hangings decorate its whitewashed stone walls, and white shields and 2 crossed longswords are mounted over the hearth. The room contains a large weirwood table carved into the shape of a shield, supported by 3 white stallions, and 3 knights sit on each side. The chair of the Lord Commander, old black oak with blanched cowhide cushions, sits at the top of the shield. The common room also contains the White Book. The undercroft of the tower holds arms and armour, while the second and third floor holds the small spa sleeping cells for the 6 brothers of the Kingsguard. The topmost floor contains the apartments of the Lord Commander. His room is sparse as well, but spacious. The sun has not yet touched the top of the castle walls, but he could smell breads baking and meats roasting. The Thoughts of Tyrion Lannister, Storm of Swords, Chapter 60, Tyrion 8. There are many other, smaller buildings as part of the Red Keep. The Council Chamber hosts meetings of the small council. Within contains a long table, at the head of which may sit the king, or the hand of the king when the king is not present. The chamber is richly furnished with Moorish carpets, a carved screen from the Summer Isles, and tapestries from Lys, Norvos, and Cahor. The chamber door is flanked by 2 Valyrian sphinxes. The door is often guarded by a knight of the Kingsguard when the council is in session, and usually multiple if the king is present. The room is well furnished, given high lords and guests from Essos often meet with the small council. We also have the Maiden Vault, where King Baelor the Blessed kept his sisters locked up to avoid being tempted by them. The Maiden Vault is a long keep with a slate roof located near the Royal Sept. The Kitchen Keep is located across the courtyard from the main kitchens of the Red Keep, and occupants can often see and smell food being prepared for the main keep itself. Below the Kitchen Keep is a gloomy cellar with a vaulted stone ceiling, and the keep connects to the other buildings through underground passageways. The godswood of the Red Keep is an acre of elm, elder, and black cottonwood trees that overlook the Blackwater Rush. The heart tree is a great oak with limbs overgrown with smokeberry vines. Princess Marcella Baratheon is known to have had a garden located near the godswood. There is also, of course, the rookery, which is the home of the ravens used by the Maester of the Citadel, serving on the small council, with the Grand Maester himself having chambers beneath the rookery. When Sansa had first beheld the Great Sept with its marble walls and 7 crystal towers, she thought it was the most beautiful building in the world, but that had been before Joffrey beheaded her father on its steps. The Thoughts of Sansa Stark, A Clash of Kings, Chapter 52, Sansa 4. The Red Keep is obviously the focal point of the skyline of King's Landing, looming above the city below from atop Aegon's high hill. If anything could challenge the scale of the Red Keep, there are 2 places that come to mind. For a long time, the Dragonpit was a dominating factor in the skyline. The huge domed building, meant to act as a dragon stable and arena, was able to fit a significant amount of the population of King's Landing within its walls. But the once grand building is now nothing but a ruin after the events of the Dance of the Dragons, with no Targaryen king investing the coin needed to repair it. The Dragonpit did not mark the end of House Targaryen's huge construction projects in King's Landing. While the Dragonpit was left to ruin, on top of Visenya's Hill will be built one of the grandest and most beautiful buildings in Westeros, so much so it has replaced the Dragonpit as a prominent aspect of the skyline of the city after the Red Keep. We are of course talking about the Great Sept of Baelor. There have been countless smaller septs built in King's Landing since its formation in the wake of Aegon's conquest, some more prominent than others. The first sept was said to have appeared shortly after the construction of the Aegonfort in 2 BC, made from a sunken cog found on the banks of the Blackwater Rush. But as the city grew around the Aegonfort, this crude sept would not do for the likes of the richer small folk moving in to the city, or even the likes of the king himself. The High Septons sponsored a grander sept built up top Visenya's Hill, but this sept would seem small in comparison to the septs to come. The Sept of Remembrance was then built on the Hill of Rhaenys to honour the late Queen Rhaenys Targaryen after her death in 10 AC, but King Maegor the Cruel would destroy the Sept during the Faith Militant Uprising with his dragon Balerion the Blackdread in 42 AC, and replaced it with the Dragonpit, which began construction soon after. King Baelor the Blessed stands out among the Targaryen kings of Westeros for his devotion to the faith. He would also be known to many as the Septon King. Baelor's faith ran so deep he would lock away his own sisters in what became known as the Maiden Vault to protect himself from being tempted by them. While some would view Baelor's devotion to the faith as a good thing, there were many who of course saw this as a negative aspect of his reign, especially with a lot of the hypocrisy and corruption within the faith Baelor was blind to. But maybe the biggest issue was the fact his focus on the faith deeply impacted his ability to be a king and rule the realm. His frequent fasting would incapacitate him, so much so he would often be on the brink of death. This all led to his Hand of the King, his uncle, the future King Viserys II, to rule the realm in his place. One day, inspired by a vision, Baelor ordered the construction of the Great Sept atop Visenya's Hill. The fate of the Grand Sept atop the hill from the reign of Aegon the Conqueror is still unknown. This new Great Sept was completed years after the death of King Baelor, and it would go on to replace the starry Sept of Oldtown as the centre of the faith in the Seven Kingdoms. When Dorne joined the Seven Kingdoms during the reign of King Daeron II, the king, with Maron Martell, Prince at Dawn, rode from the Red Keep to the Great Sept. The two men placed a wreath before the statue of Baelor, whom had played a key role in keeping the peace between Dawn and House Targaryen in his youth. For the rest of Targaryen rule, the Great Sept of Baelor would be used for many key religious events and ceremonies, with coronations, and near every major wedding in the city happening within its walls. None of the devoted paid Jaime any mind. They made a circuit of the Sept, worshipping at each of the 7 altars to honour the 7 aspects of the deity. To each god they made sacrifice, to each they sang a hymn. Sweet and solemn rose their voices. Thoughts of Jaime Lannister, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 8, Jaime 1. The Great Sept of Baelor has a plaza of white marble which surrounds it, featuring a statue of King Baelor the Blessed, standing tall and proud and serene upon a plinth, his face a study of benevolence. Large gardens capable of holding hundreds of people surround the Sept, with flowers and plants from all around Westeros, and even some from Essos. The main route to the Sept consists of huge marble steps that lead up to the building's main entrance. The Great Sept itself is an impressive marble structure, with a great dome and several slender crystal towers, each for one of the aspects of the faith. It has huge bells of which can be rung in the morning or to gather crowds that can be heard from even miles away from the city. The high dome is made of leaded glass, gold and crystal, and is said to be one of the most spectacular sites of architecture in the Seven Kingdoms. Before the doors leading into the building is a raised marble pulpit from which a septon can address a gathered crowd below. Past the towering outer doors is a hall of lamp which is suspended by globes of coloured leaded glass with a floor of polished marble. Past this entrance hall, through the inner doors, is the cavernous sept proper, with 7 broad aisles meeting beneath the dome. The interior contains benches for worshippers and a stepped marble table upon which bodies can be placed for funeral services of lords and the rich. Almost as spectacular as the Hall of Lamps, the main building has a high window, and light is reflected into rainbows by hanging crystals and the glass of the dome. In many ways, to most common men, its construction is as wondrous as the likes of the High Tower or the Wall. The sept itself is within the main chamber, with the 7 stone towering statues of the 7 aspects of the faith. Scented candles can be placed by worshippers at each altar, with the most placed before the altar of the Mother and the Maiden, but with only a few before the stranger. The warrior stands on an altar of red marble. Different altars are used for different ceremonies depending on their purpose. For example, marriages tend to be conducted at the altar between the 2 towering gilded statues of the father and the mother. There are several sets of doors leading into the sept proper. Septons use the father's door, Septors the mother's door, and the Silent Sisters use their own sept, the Stranger's sept, a smaller adjacent room to the main chamber. The Great Sept has a main chamber where most of the public worship is done, but also several smaller septs, various crypts and chapels, and a rainbow pool. The sept has tombs where many of the Targaryen kings have been laid to rest, with many ashes of long-dead Targaryens being moved from Dragonstone to the sept. Its deep vaults hold costly vestments, rings, crystal gowns, and other treasures of the faith. Below the ground is a seven-sided audience chamber, with the faces of the seven carved into the bare stone walls, with their eyes made of onyx, malachite, yellow moonstone, and jade. There is also cells of various sizes for penitents are found in the towers, which have rough stone steps. Individuals accused by the faith can also be held in the chambers below the sept, which is often done for accused highborn transgressors. The Great Sept of Baelor plays a prominent role in the main book series, being the location of Eddard Stark's execution, which kickstarts the War of the Five Kings. The royal wedding of Joffrey and Margaery Tyrell takes place at midday on the first day of the year 300 AC in the Great Sept of Baelor, and after Joffrey dies during his wedding feast, his body is entombed there. Later, the Faith of the Seven confines Margaery in a cell atop one of the Great Sept's towers, although mass crowds gather outside the sept in protest. Cersei Lannister is of course pleased at Margaery's arrest, but the High Septon, known as the High Sparrow, also has the Queen Regent imprisoned in a tower cell, with her later taking a walk of atonement from the sept back to the Red Keep. While we don't know what kind of role the sept will play in the Winds of Winter, we know it has one, given Margaery is still being held, with House Tyrell very keen to secure her release. In the show, the Great Sept is blown up by a vengeful Cersei. However, it does seem unlikely the book will follow this same path, but that does not mean the Great Sept of Baelor won't have some other tragic fate in the book. In King's Landing, your ancestors raised an immense domed castle for their dragons. The Dragonpit, it's called. It stood atop the Hill of Rhaenys. They're all in ruins now. This is where the royal dragons dwelt in the days of yore, and a cavernous dwelling it was, with iron doors so wide 30 knights could ride through them abreast. Yet even so, it was noted that none of the pit dragons ever reached the size of their ancestors. The maesters say this was because of the walls around them, and the great dome above their heads. Barristan Selmy to Daenerys Targaryen, A Storm of Swords Chapter 8, Daenerys 1. The Dragonpit is a fascinating part of the history of King's Landing, because it also speaks to some of the key elements of Targaryen history as well. Namely, with the Dragonpit, you can chart the rise and fall of House Targaryen over their near 300 years of dominance in Westeros before their downfall instigated by the Mad King, Aerys II, and Robert's Rebellion. It very much shows us the might and power of House Targaryen, while also the hubris that led to its slow decline. The Dragonpit was essentially a man-made cave, a cavernous building which was the home of the dragons of House Targaryen after Aegon's conquest. Sitting atop Rhaenys' hill in King's Landing, its huge scale left a dominating presence on the skyline of the city. Just like the Red Keep, you would be hard-pressed to find a place in King's Landing where you could hide from its shadow. After the events of the Dance of the Dragons, this once mighty tribute to Targaryen power has been left abandoned and in ruins. The Dragonpit is effectively a huge domed amphitheatre at the summit of Rhaenys' hill. The main gate consisted of massive doors made of bronze and iron. They were said to be so wide that 30 knights a horse could ride through all at once. It would make the entrance approximately 120 feet, or 36 meters wide. Many lesser entrances were also present. Some of them were simple oak and iron doors that surrounded the building itself. The building's walls were so thick and the roof so strong, a huge dome was constructed above the pit, with benches located within the pit itself, which could seat 80,000. With many more thousands able to fit into the centre of the pit. Within the structure, long brick-lined tunnels have been dug deep into the hillside, fashioned like caves. 5 times as large as the dragon layers on Dragonstone, these man-made caves serve as the nest of the dragons, whom call the pit home. While many of the Targaryen dragons did live in the pit, there were mostly those being actively used by the royal family at the time, with many Targaryen dragons still remaining on Dragonstone. Beneath the dome, there were 40 huge undervaults, which had been carved in a great ring. These man-made caves were closed off at both sides by thick iron doors. The inner doors opened onto the sands of the pit itself, and the outer doors opened to the hillside. Some tales of the small folk claim that when the dragons still lived in the pit, nestled beneath the dome, bright lights would often shine through the windows at night. During the storming of the Dragonpit during the Targaryen Civil War, known as the Dance of the Dragons, it was sadly destroyed, leaving the huge dome now broken, the building in ruins, the pit's walls blackened with fire. The pit has now been abandoned for a century, and its huge doors have been sealed. No king since has invested the coin needed to repair it or repurpose the pit for a different function. Hardly had the last stone been set on the Red Keep that Maegor commanded the ruins of the Sept of Remembrance be cleared from the top of Rhaenys' hill, and with them the bones and ashes of the warriors' sons who had perished there. In their place, he decreed a great stone stable for dragons would be erected, a lair worthy of Balerion, Vhagar, and their Get. Thus commenced the building of the Dragonpit. The writings of Galdane, the world of ice and fire, the Targaryen kings, Maegor 1. Construction on the Dragonpit began in 42 AC, during the early phases of the Faith Militant Uprising. King Maegor the Cruel had just taken the throne, usurping his brother's sons. The first issue for the new king to deal with was the Faith Uprising. After flying to King's Landing on his dragon Balerion the Blackdread, King Maegor used the dragon flames to burn the Sept of Remembrance on top of Rhaenys' hill, which was being used by the Faith Militant as a headquarters. 3 years later, shortly after the completion of the Red Keep, Maegor ordered the construction of the Dragonpit, which he called a great stone stable for dragons. Because Maegor had killed all those who had worked on the Red Keep to hide its secrets, many of those hired to construct the building fled. Maegor eventually had to use city prisoners, with supervisors from Myr and Volantis, effectively slave labour. Maegor would not see his pet project finished after he mysteriously died upon the Iron Throne in 48 AC. Construction of the Dragonpit continued into the reign of Maegor's successor, King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, initially led by Jaehaerys' Hand of the King, Lord Rhaegar Baratheon. In 49 AC, Rhaegar married Queen Regent Alyssa Velaryon in the Dragonpit, in what was known as the Golden Wedding, witnessed by 40,000 people. Rhaegar wished to complete the Dragonpit before Jaehaerys came of age, and would start to rule on his own, but found himself lacking the proper funds to continue the construction by the year 50 AC. After Jaehaerys assumed the crown, his newly appointed Master of Coin, Rhaego Draz, secured funds by loaning gold from the Iron Bank of Braavos, Tyrosh and Myr. By 52 AC, King Jaehaerys would often visit the Dragonpit to keep an eye on the progress of its slow construction. We do know that by this time, a proper workforce had been found to continue the building of the pit, and by all accounts they were well paid with a fair wage for their works by the new king. But eventually, due to all of the taxes imposed by the Master of Coin to pay for the Dragonpit's completion, and the other improvements needed for King's Landing, Rhaegar's popularity plummeted significantly. Construction on the pit was finally completed in 55 AC, and a great tourney was held in celebration. For the first few years after the Dragonpit was completed, very few dragons called it home. In 55 AC, Balerion the Blackdread went missing with Princess Aeria Targaryen, whom had tried to claim the dragon without permission. When Balerion returned to Westeros a year later, he was badly wounded, with the princess dying an agonizing death soon after. King Jaehaerys had the dragon confined to the Dragonpit, where he would recover from his wounds. He also created a new order of 77 warriors, the Dragon Keepers, to guard the royal dragons and act as their keepers, to ensure something like the fate of Aeria could never happen again, at least not so easily. 3 younger dragons were soon housed in the Dragonpit, alongside Balerion, though Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne kept their own dragons, Vermithor and Silverwing, in the Red Keep, as they were frequently flying between King's Landing and Dragonstone. By 72 AC, the dragon Caraxes had hatched and was considered the finest of the young dragons living at the pit, as the Blackdread by this time had grown old and sluggish. In 57 AC, Princess Alyssa Targaryen claimed the young dragon Meleys as her mount inside the walls of the pit. In 84 AC, Princess Sarah Targaryen attempted to sneak into the Dragonpit to claim a dragon without her father's permission, but was caught by the Dragon Keepers and returned to the Red Keep. By 93 AC, Prince Viserys Targaryen, the future King Viserys, claimed Balerion the Blackdread from within the pit. However, the Blackdread would soon die of old age. King Jaehaerys I was the first king to have his funeral in the Dragonpit, when he was cremated there in 103 AC. The Dragonpit would play a huge role in the Targaryen civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons in 129 AC. At the start of the Dance of the Dragons, King Aegon II Targaryen was crowned within the pit to a rapturous and cheering crowd. However, there of course was some confusion, as many had expected Rhaenyra to be crowned on her father's death. According to Grandmaster Munkin, more than 100,000 small folk were jammed into the building, with the whole of the Dragonpit floor filled with onlookers. Later in the war, during the fall of King's Landing to Aegon II's rival Rhaenyra Targaryen, the dragon Sheepstealer would land atop the Dragonpit. During the brief time Rhaenyra ruled King's Landing, the Dragonpit housed 9 dragons: Caraxes, Vermithor, Silverwing, and Sheepstealer, who would all eventually fly off to battle. The Dragonpit became the site of executions of traitors, rebels, and murderers. Due to the Greens hiding the gold from the treasury before the city fell, Rhaenyra had imposed many harsh taxes and found new ways of generating income. For the price of 3 pennies, the people of King's Landing were allowed to watch criminals be beheaded and their corpses fed to Rhaenyra's dragons. By 130 AC, it had become a custom that at least one dragon rider resided in the Dragonpit to rise to the defense of the city should it be necessary. As Rhaenyra's grip on power quickly began to unravel, the 5 dragons that remained in the city were killed during the storming of the Dragonpit, when tens of thousands of crazed and starving smallfolk, led by a religious zealot known as the Shepherd, stormed the Dragonpit to kill the dragons. All 4 remaining dragons inside, as well as Rhaenyra's dragon Syrax, were killed in the struggle, as well as thousands of small folk. The Dragonpit was reduced to a flaming ruin. During the following Moon of Madness that followed Rhaenyra's flight from the city, the Shepherd held sway over tens of thousands of people from the ruins of the pit. The heads of the 5 slain dragons were displayed on posts between which the Shepherd preached every night. 2 days after Lord Boros Baratheon reclaimed the Red Keep in the name of Aegon II, the Shepherd was arrested amidst the ruins of the Dragonpit. After Aegon II returned to the city, he commanded the Dragonpit be restored and rebuilt. The Dragonpit atop the Hill of Rhaenys had been abandoned for a century and a half. He supposed it was as good a place as any to store wildfire, and better than most, but it would have been nice if the late Lord Rossard had told someone the thoughts of Tyrion Lannister. A Clash of Kings Chapter 49, Tyrion 11. The Dragonpit would never return to its former glory, not just for the lack of dragons to house there after the dance, but for the sheer amount of gold needed to rebuild it. Gold that was needed badly throughout the Seven Kingdoms in the wake of the bloody Civil War. Sir Tyler Lannister, the Hand of the King, in the first years of King Aegon III's reign, did continue restorations of the Dragonpit by setting hundreds of stonemasons, carpenters and builders to work, but quickly work stopped once again. The last dragon to call the pit home was Morning, the dragon of Lady Rhaenyra Targaryen, in 133 AC. During the Great Spring Sickness in 209 AC, so many people died in King's Landing, there was no time to bury the dead. Instead, they were piled up in the Dragonpit, and when the corpses were 10 feet deep, the Hand of the King, Lord Brendan Rivers, ordered the pyromancers to burn them. The light of these fires shone through the windows day and night, so bright citizens could see the dark green glow of the wildfire all throughout King's Landing. By the time of the reign of King Aerys II, the Mad King, wildfire was now being stored and made beneath the caves of the pit during the wildfire plot towards the end of Robert's Rebellion. Into the time of the main books, the Dragonpit remains a ruin, overlooking King's Landing like a spectre of House Targaryen. The bottom had a stench to it, a stink of pigsties and stables and tanners' sheds, mixed in with the sour smell of wine sinks and cheap whorehouses. The thoughts of Arya Stark, Game of Thrones Chapter 65, Arya 5. When you look at any city in Westeros, it will naturally be divided up into districts of differing wealth and fortune. The rich and very well off will try to separate themselves from the common rabble of the city, walling themselves off in large manses on higher elevations, in the case of King's Landing, on the slopes of Visenya's and Rhaenys' hills, with the poorer small folk gathering in the shadows of the more affluent members of society, eking out a meagre existence, just trying to get by day to day, feeding themselves and their family the best they can. The existence of the poorest small folk is grim in Westeros, with hard choices having to be made daily, and to some, the idea of living in the urban squalor of a city is not an appealing idea. But what must be remembered is even the urban squalor have their advantages compared to other poorer members of small folk, perhaps living in the countryside, farming the land. Each has their drawbacks, with it being up to the individual to decide what elements they value more. While the same can be said for any of the cities in Westeros, the poorest area of King's Landing, known as Flea Bottom, is not just widely known up and down Westeros, but across the known world as well. Flea Bottom is by far the most downtrodden area of King's Landing and has been for centuries, ever since the redevelopment of the city by King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, and perhaps even long before that. It is rife with poverty, and crime is such a common occurrence, most just turn a blind eye. Even the Gold Cloaks of the City Watch have a hard time managing the crime in the area, which is not helped by how insular the population of Flea Bottom has become. It is a maze of twisty, unpaved alleys and crisscrossing streets. It's very easy to get lost and find yourself in a dangerous spot, a gang-controlled area or a hotspot for pickpockets, waiting for an inexperienced newcomer to wander on by, often rich folk who have lost their way in the maze of Flea Bottom. The area itself sits just below the Street of Flour, on the way down the east side of Rhaenys Hill. Despite being so close to the bakers of the Street of Flour, the air of Flea Bottom certainly does not smell of freshly baked bread. Many of the buildings of Flea Bottom that have been built since around 55 AC were meant to be temporary abodes, as the owners found necessary coin to improve their dwellings. But in the case of Flea Bottom, that never happened, and more hovels were built on top of each other, despite the work of King Jaehaerys to improve the layout and infrastructure of the city. The buildings lean over narrow alleys, almost touching, the air filled with the stench of pigsties and stables and tanners' sheds, mixed in with the smell of wine sinks and whorehouses. Gamblers' dens and rat pits are also in huge number in Flea Bottom. A wine sink is not your normal tavern, but often a pub often frequented by the rougher sort of patron, managed by gangs, and thus attracting criminal activity. They're usually seedy, unsavoury places of ill repute, and most godly and rich folk would be ashamed to be found in there. Whores can be found plying their trade in wine sinks, but most would agree many of these whores are really preying on the drunks, hoping to rob them while they are indisposed. Wine sinks primarily serve wine, but is also known to offer food, both of questionable quality. But as a result, the prices are very cheap compared to your normal tavern. They are also an excellent source of gossip, with master whisperers for the king known to have spies in wine sinks across the city. While there are wine sinks in other areas of the city, most of them are located in and around Flea Bottom. Just like the wine sinks, the whorehouses of Flea Bottom are just as awful and just as sad. While their services are of course cheap, they come with the similar risk of robbery, and most of all, disease and pox. There is a reason the rich frequent the more upmarket establishments. Another prominent feature of Flea Bottom is the rat pits, which exist in most cities in Westeros in some form, but none operate so openly as the rat pits of Flea Bottom, where even the City Watch will turn a blind eye to a lot of the criminal activity that occurs there. Rat pits serve as an unsavoury form of recreation for mostly poorer small folk inhabitants of the city. Rats are made to fight each other, or sometimes dogs are set on the rats to compete to see who can kill the most rats first. Many of the rat catchers that once worked at the Red Keep also competed in the rat pits. Spectators pay to watch and also take bets on participants. Highborn men have been known to frequent the rat pits too. There are even some rat pits that are rumoured to host child fighting. Flea Bottom is known across the world for its infamous bowl of brown, a thick stew made by the pot shops of Flea Bottom. While similar meals are made in every city in the world, a bowl of brown is the most well known. It's often cooked for long periods of time, simmering potentially year after year inside huge tubs where it receives new ingredients while being constantly served to the poorest residents of the cities. Common ingredients include barley, carrot, onion, turnip, apple, and whatever pieces of meat its makers can get hold of or dare to include in it. In King's Landing, this commonly means locally caught fish. The meats vary according to each pot shop and how much you're willing to pay, but it's not uncommon for it to include the likes of pigeon, rat, and any other meat you can think of, especially the cheaper bowls of brown. Some have even been rumoured to use dead bodies of dubious origins. While it certainly likely is true, it's obviously a very uncommon occurrence. Typical bowls have a film of grease over it, and is mostly pieces of vegetables used as ingredients. If you're lucky enough to get meat in your bowl of brown, it's harder to identify, and most customers don't really want to try to. It's not wholly clear when the stew first came to prominence, but some form of it likely dates back to the era of the Conquest as the city of King's Landing began to rapidly grow. It at least existed as of the Dance of the Dragons between 129 and 131 AC. According to the Full Mushroom, the younger son of Lord Hornwood and 2 of his companions may have ended up in a bowl of brown after disappearing from Flea Bottom in the aftermath of the dance. We also know that when he was young, Sir Duncan the Tall would sell pigeons and rats to pot shops in King's Landing. The formation of Flea Bottom is exactly as you would expect. King's Landing began as a booming town after the Targaryen conquest, but no one planned it, and thus it simply just grew. What started as Aegon Targaryen's initial foothold and stockade on the mainland mushroomed into a size so quickly and haphazardly that several slum districts developed, the largest and worst of which was of course Flea Bottom. 10 years after the conquest, King's Landing had reached the size of a true city, almost as large as Gold Town or White Harbour. 25 years after the conquest, it had outgrown them both, surpassed only by Lannisport and Old Town, which it would soon outgrow as well. It is unclear when the slum known as Flea Bottom first congealed out of the mud of this rushed expansion, but the earliest chronological mention of it is in 49 AC, and it's very likely Flea Bottom is the result of several smaller slums growing and merging into one huge slum. During the terrible winter of 59 AC, when the plague known as the Shivers struck Westeros, King's Landing was badly affected. So many of the City Watch died in the plague that the city outside the Red Keep itself was reduced to lawlessness and looting. The Master of Coin, Rigo Draz, was killed in Flea Bottom during this time, ripped to pieces by an angry gang who cut off the gemstones with his dead fingers. During the early reign of King Viserys I, in 103 AC, the king put his younger brother, Daemon, in charge of the City Watch. Up until that point, they had been very poorly equipped and trained, an assortment of lazy and disorganized guardsmen, most not fit for the job, but Daemon updated and formed them into essentially a small private army, well trained while armed with uniform and armor, and a gold cloak, which gives them their names. Daemon led his Gold Cloaks on a brutal campaign to smash crime in Flea Bottom, and for a while it appeared to be effective, after which he would drink for free in its taverns, sampled whores for free in its brothels, and always won money in the gambling dens. This earned Daemon Targaryen the nickname Lord Flea Bottom, one he would both love and loathe. Just because you grew up in the slum of Flea Bottom doesn't mean you are doomed to spend your whole life in squalor and poverty. Sir Duncan the Tall, the legendary Kingsguard Knight and Lord Commander of the Kingsguard of King Aegon V, was born in Flea Bottom before becoming a squire to the Hedge Knight Sir Arlen of Pennytree, eventually becoming a Hedge Knight himself before becoming a member of the White Cloaks. Another case is that of Davos Seaworth, who was born in Flea Bottom before becoming a notorious smuggler. During Robert's Rebellion, he managed to smuggle food into the besieged Storm's End and effectively saved the life of Stannis Baratheon, who was holding the castle in his brother's name, with Stannis granting Davos a knighthood and land of his own as a reward, with Seaworth eventually becoming Stannis' Hand of the King during the War of Five Kings, as seen in the main book series. There are many other notable residents of Flea Bottom, such as Gendry, one of the bastard sons of King Robert Baratheon, as well as notorious criminals Rorge and Biter, among others. Daemon gave us these cloaks, and their gold, no matter how you turn them. Luther Largent to Gawain Hightower, Fire and Blood, the Dying of the Dragons, the Red Dragon and the Gold. The Gold Cloaks are maybe the most famous city watch, not just in Westeros, but in the whole known world. Few city watches have become so integral to the management of a city, but more so deeply within the political fabric of Westeros itself. In essence, a city watch is meant to keep the peace within a city and ensure law and order is kept. While larger the city, the larger the city watch needs to be to manage it. Even smaller towns in Westeros have their own town watches that function in a similar manner, with the watches in smaller seats, often made up of the household guard of the lord of the town. Even smaller settlements might forego a watch altogether, with law and order maintained by the lord and his men personally. The bigger the city, the bigger the problem, and the larger the watch needs to be to tackle it. And while the Gold Cloaks of King's Landing do a decent job at keeping the peace most of the time, they are not infallible and have their own blind spots and forms of corruption that have become all but impossible to root out. As far as we can tell, during the early development of King's Landing, during the reigns of King Aegon the Conqueror and King Aenys, the household guard of House Targaryen seemed to have partially acted in the capacity of the City Watch. But as the city grew so quickly, it became clear there would not be enough men to maintain control of this growing town. From what is implied, the City Watch was formally created during the early reign of King Maegor the Cruel, or at the very least, that's the earliest reference we have of a formal King's Landing City Watch. It seems at this time the commander of the City Watch was a man loyal to King Maegor, as after Maegor's death and King Jaehaerys' claim to the throne, he had the commander arrested, appointing a man of his own choosing, specifically Lord Carl Corbray. But in around 59 AC, Westeros was struck by a sickness known as the Shivers, with Lord Carl being one of the high-profile people at court to die of it. But not only did the City Watch lose their commander, many men of the Watch were stricken down as well. All this would leave the streets of King's Landing falling into anarchy, with no form of law and order for weeks, until the Shivers passed, and what remained of the Watch were able to regain control of the streets. Some of the poorer slums, such as Flea Bottom, took even longer to stabilise, with arguments made that they never truly have been. While of course the City Watch at King's Landing was functional and did a job, it really changed into the Gold Cloaks we know today during the early reign of King Viserys I Targaryen, who appointed his wayward younger brother Prince Daemon as commander of the Watch, and giving him a remit to reform and rework how the City Watch functioned in order to ensure they could effectively do their jobs. Prince Daemon officially took command in 104 AC. The first thing he sought to do was give his men better equipment, as much of what they had access to at this point was either ridiculously old or not fit for purpose. He also wanted to give an identifiable look and give the men of the Watch something to be proud to serve in and proud to be a part of. He gave each man a gleaming gold cloak, and it's from this cloak the Watch gained its nickname, the Gold Cloaks, as they have been known ever since. The weapons he issued were much better than the rusty old swords or clubs used before. Daemon gave each man a gleaming new dirk, short swords and cudgels. There were 2,000 gold cloaks at the time, and all this new equipment came at a great cost, but a cost King Viserys was willing to pay if it kept Daemon out of trouble. The men of the Watch loved Daemon for all he had given them, and were deeply loyal to him. But even so, Daemon used his position for his own gain, drinking and whoring in the darkest places of the city, with his interpretation of law and punishment seen as heavy-handed, with frequent bloody midnight raids to root out crime. Those he judged guilty were often punished quickly and without trial, and these punishments brutal themselves. It is believed much of this factored into the souring of Daemon's relationship with the hand of the king, Otto Hightower, who urged the king to remove his brother from the role of commander. Ultimately, Daemon would be removed as the commander of the Watch, not by Otto's hand, but by his own, after his infamous King for a Day speech after the death of Queen Aemma Arryn and the newborn son of King Viserys. It's unclear what happened to the Gold Cloaks between 105 AC and the start of the Dance of the Dragons. But at its onset, it appears that they were initially loyal to the Greens and King Aegon II. But the Greens were faced with a problem. As far as they were aware, the officers may have been loyal, but the same might not be said for the rest of the rank and file members of the Watch, who had mostly been recruited by Daemon, and these were the same men who had shown him fierce loyalty. It meant that when it came time for the real fight for the city, the Watch could turn to the Blacks in an instant. Sir Luther Largent was appointed commander at the start of the war, but Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, named his own son Sir Gawain as Luther's second in command, which suggests he did not wholly trust Sir Luther. In the end, this would actually be a huge misstep, as Otto's instincts were right. When the Blacks finally marched on King's Landing, Luther Largent led a coup in support of the Blacks and personally killed Gawain Hightower. As history shows us, the Blacks struggled to hold King's Landing in what became known as the Moon of Madness, or the Moon of the Three Kings. After Luther was killed during the riots, Sir Balon Birch became the new commander. The Mudfoot garrison, stationed at the Rivergate, or Mudgate, joined the Hedge Knight and would-be kingmaker Perkin the Flea, who declared their allegiance to Tristan Truefire, one of the three pretender kings, then flew his banner above the river gate. The garrison stationed at the Gate of the God was overwhelmed by Perkin's men. As Rhaenyra fled King's Landing, 20 Gold Cloaks accompanied her, but half of them deserted on the road to Rosby, and the remainder stayed at Duskendale when she sailed for Dragonstone. Sir Perkin became the commander of the City Watch and was pardoned for his role in the Moon of Madness by King Aegon II after he had recaptured King's Landing. At the start of the reign of King Aegon III, much like during the Shivers that decimated the ranks of the Gold Cloaks during the reign of King Jaehaerys, many Gold Cloaks died during the Winter Fever. When you add in the number of men who were killed during the Moon of Madness, the Watch was barely functioning, so Lord Unwin Peake, Lord Protector of the Realm, added 500 of his own men to the City Watch, until new recruits could be found and trained. While this, of course, seems very generous of Lord Unwin Peake, by doing so, he ensured a large bulk of the rank and file of the City Watch answered directly to him, maintaining and ensuring his own power and position. Later, during what became known as the Lycene Spring, George Graceford admitted that Sir Lucas Legard, the Gold Cloaks commander, and 6 of the 7 gate captains had conspired against King Aegon III and Prince Viserys, once again bringing into question exactly how loyal the men of the City Watch truly were. The reputation of the Gold Cloaks and their effectiveness further declined over the next few decades until a new low was reached during the reign of King Aegon IV, known to the pages of history as Aegon the Unworthy. Aegon promoted lickspittles within the Watch and used them as go-betweens to make sure brothels were available for his lust. It took more than a year for Aegon's son and successor, King Daeron II, to reorganise the City Watch after his father's death, and even then it was still a shadow of what it had once been at its peak. By the time Robert Baratheon took the Iron Throne in the wake of the downfall of House Targaryen, the City Watch as an institution was now widely known to be corrupt and for its brutal approach to peacekeeping. The people of King's Landing had lost its trust with the Gold Cloaks, and in some areas of the city, crime ran rampant. So much so the presence of Gold Cloaks in the darkest slums was a rare sight. King Robert Baratheon continued the institution of the Gold Cloaks and did very little to remove the rot from within, if anything, worsening it, by appointing Janos Slynt their commander after the death of Manly Stokeworth. During his time as commander of the Gold Cloaks, Janos was widely known for taking bribes and selling positions and promotions. By the end of his tenure, over half of the officers were paying him part of their salaries. Lord Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King, discovered this and had 2 men who were willing to come forward to testify against Janos, but both were found dead a short time later, and no further men were willing to come forward. King Robert recognised Janos' corruption, but he allowed him to remain in his position, as he argued his successor could very well be worse. The king's brother, Lord Stannis, felt that Lord Peter Baelish had convinced Robert to retain Janos Slynt. He believed that as long as Slynt was in power, the Gold Cloaks would continue to flounder. The fickle loyalty of Janos Slynt would later play a huge role in what started the War of 5 Kings. After Robert Baratheon's death, Peter Baelish, the Master of Coin, informed Hand of the King Eddard Stark he would make certain the Gold Cloaks are loyal to him in the power struggle that was about to occur between Queen Cersei Lannister and Eddard, with a bribe of 6,000 gold coins. But in truth, Peter bribes Janos Slynt to support Cersei, which is ultimately successful when Janos and 100 Gold Cloaks accompany Eddard to the throne room and betray him, killing the Winterfell guardsman. Slynt is then rewarded by being named Lord of Harrenhal, but is later exiled to the Wall by the acting Hand of the King, Tyrion Lannister, for his corruption and potential betrayal. Janos' replacement is Sir Jacelyn Bywater, an honourable veteran of the Greyjoy Rebellion who helped Tyrion prepare the city in defence of the impending invasion of Stannis Baratheon. Towards the end of his time as commander of the City Watch, Sir Janos had tripled the number of Gold Cloaks, making them 6,000 strong. While this may seem like a good idea on the surface, the truth of the matter is there wasn't enough resources to support that many watchmen. This meant the new watchmen were poorly trained, with many being drunks, brutes or cravens, who joined for the promise of bread and coin. Tyrion believes that only a quarter of them, around 1,500, were reliable as actual soldiers in a fight. When Stannis arrives and the Battle of the Blackwater begins, the Watch constitutes the bulk of the defending force of the city. When King Joffrey withdraws from the walls, the men break, as Tyrion had expected. The commander Jacelyn Bywater did attempt to rally them, but is killed by his own men on the cusp of success. While the Battle of the Blackwater was won, the reputation of the Gold Cloaks who defended the city did not improve, with old patterns of behaviour continuing as they always had done. While Prince Daemon did reform the Gold Cloaks and give them a sense of purpose, even then there was brutality and bribery. but Daemon, being a natural leader of men, was able to keep them in line and make them an effective unit. Over the decades, issues with the Gold Cloaks have never really been addressed, and it's all perfectly summarised by how easily Sir Janos Slynt was bought and sold multiple times over, and how willing he was to sell himself at the outbreak of the War of the Five Kings. The gates of King's Landing are very often forgotten when talking about its history, overshadowed by the city itself, and well, the walls they are a part of. But the gates of King's Landing are not like any other city gates. Each has its own role to play in the history of King's Landing, some of them so huge they contributed to some huge changes that happened over the last 300 years of Targaryen history. While the obvious function of a city gate is to allow passage in and out of a city through its walls, they are also as much of a key defensive structure as the walls themselves. Often, it is where different regiments of the City Watch are based, and where they keep much of their equipment. In the event of an attack, the opposing force will often be drawn to attack the city gates, as they are much easier to overcome than the solid stone walls. However, this also means the attackers must funnel much of their strength to attack this single location, opening them up to attacks from the defenders via archers with bows or burning oil pulled from the battlements, and even something as simple as a rock thrown from above. Other than being a defensive measure, gates are also used to control who comes and goes from a city, keeping undesirable characters out. They are key in controlling trade in and out of the city, with guards often inspecting goods passing through, and tax collectors collecting any money owed. The gates of King's Landing were built at the same time as the city walls themselves, which finished construction in 26 AC. But House Targaryen did everything with scale, and King's Landing would not just have 1 or 2 gates like most others, but 7, to honour the 7 gods of the faith. But even then these gates were like no other, not only huge, but some of them ornate and a marvel to observe. It was a statement of intent to show all those entering this new city the power of House Targaryen, that they would spend so much time and resources on a gateway. The mud gate was open, and a squad of city watchmen stood under the portcullis in their gold cloaks leaning on spears. When a column of riders appeared from the west, the guardsmen sprang into action, shouting commands and moving the craft and foot traffic aside to let the knights enter with his escort. The Thoughts of Eddard Stark, A Game of Thrones Chapter 27, Eddard 6. Historically, the River Gate is arguably the most relevant of the 7 gates of King's Landing, with it by far having the most documented history when compared to the others. It is named the River Gate due to its location on the banks of the Blackwater Rush, but it's also called the Mud Gate by the small folk due to the sheer amount of thick mud around the bank itself. The River Gate is near the centre of the southeast wall and connects to Fishmonger Square and the wharfs of the Blackwater Rush, making it a key access point for goods entering the city via Blackwater Bay. The Street of Steel begins at the Market Square beside the River Gate, and the River Row runs from the River Gate to the King's Gate. The fish market is found outside of the gate and is a maze of unorganised stalls selling fish from the bay. Opposite the River Gate, on the southern shore of the Blackwater, is the King's Road, which leads directly to Storm's End. There are a few common threads of the history of some of these gates. For example, in the reign of King Maegor, he had his own wife and queen, Alice Harroway, tortured to death by Tiana of the Tower, another one of his wives. Following her death, Alice's body was cut into 7 parts and mounted on spikes above each of the 7 gates of the city. 3 kings reigned over the city, each on his own hill, yet for their unfortunate subjects there was no law, no justice, no protection, no home was safe, nor any maiden's virtue. Granmaes the Munkin, in the true telling. Fire and Blood, the dying of the dragons. Rhaenyra overthrown. During the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen Civil War fought between 129 and 131 AC. There was a small battle at the River Gate during the fall of King's Landing to Rhaenyra Targaryen's Black faction. 13 Hightower Knights and around 100 men-at-arms held the River Gate from attack from both outside and inside of the city, but eventually the gate fell to the Blacks despite the heroic last stand of the Knights. Later into the Dance of the Dragons, as Rhaenyra began to lose control of King's Landing, a massive riot broke out in the city streets, with sailors unable to return to their ships. They attacked the River Gate. Sir Luther Largent, the Lord Commander of the City Watch, and 400 spearmen were eventually able to disperse the rioters, though the gate was badly damaged and hundreds of men were slain, including 25 Gold Cloaks. As these riots intensified, the banner of King Trystane Truefire, one of the 3 pretender kings of the Moon of Madness, was raised above the river gate's battlements, and the bodies of its captains and all 3 of its sergeants were hung from the gatehouse. During the reign of King Aegon III, lessons would be learned from the Dance of the Dragons, specifically that the only reason the Hightower Knights were not able to hold the river gate was the fact they were attacked from outside the walls and inside the walls. Much was done to strengthen the interior defences of all of the gates. Interestingly, during the Lycene Spring, Rogerio Roger opened up a pillow house known as the Mermaid beside the river gate, which became very successful, and still is so with sailors to this day. By the time of the main books, we know that the river gate was under the command of Sir Jacelyn Bywater, who would later go on to replace Sir Janos Slynt as commander of the Gold Cloaks at the start of the War of the Five Kings. It was known well before the battle that the river gate would play a huge part in the Battle of the Blackwater. In preparation for Stannis Baratheon's attack, Tyrion Lannister, the acting hand of the king, tours the riverfront. In preparation, carpenters extend the wooden hoardings from the battlements of the river gate, and 3 catapults are raised in the market square by the gate. During the battle itself, the Lannisters burn the riverfront and retreat through the river gate. King Joffrey Baratheon is at the gate with Tyrion and his Kingsguard, with the king encouraging the archers on the hoardings. The river gate is assaulted with a battering ram by the army of Stannis. But when Sir Osmond Kettleblack informs Queen Regent Cersei Lannister that the gate is under attack, Cersei orders that Joffrey be brought back to the Red Keep. Tyrion and Sir Mandon Moore ride to the river gate after defending the King's Gate. Ultimately, the river gate stands and Stannis is defeated. The funeral procession departed King's Landing through the Gate of the Gods, wider and more splendid than the Lion Gate. The choice felt wrong to Jaime. His father had been a lion, that no one could deny, but even Lord Tywin never claimed to be a god. The Thoughts of Jaime Lannister, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 16, Jaime 2. The Lion Gate is located near the centre of the southwest wall of King's Landing, with the Gold Road to Lannisport in the Westerlands starting at the gate. It is believed this is where the gate gets its name from, given the sigil of House Lannister is a lion. The Lion Gate is much narrower and less ornate than some of the other gates in the city. The Gold Cloaks who are stationed at the Lion's Gate are known as Lions. It's assumed the men stationed at the other gates go by their own name, but we do not know if this is an unofficial name or something official within the City Watch itself. In 55 AC, we know that the field west of the Lion Gate was used to host the tourney to mark the completion of the construction of the Dragonpit, thus was likely used a lot during this time period. It also played a slightly different role during the Dance of the Dragons than the River Gate or the King's Gate. The men of the City Watch stationed there, rather than defend the gate during the riots of the Moon of Madness, abandoned their post and joined with the rioters themselves. The Lion Gate plays little role in the main books, but after the funeral of Tywin Lannister, Lord Giles Rosby tells Queen Regent Cersei Lannister that he's hired a master stonecarver to sculpt a statue of her father by the Lion Gate. The entire fish market is gone, and both the River Gate and the King's Gate are splintered from the battering Stannis gave them and should be replaced. I shudder to think of the cost. You will find whatever gold is required. Tywin Lannister to Tyrion Lannister. A Storm of Swords, Chapter 32, Tyrion 4. The King's Gate shares a similar history with the River Gate, but with some minor differences. The King's Gate is located by the southern corner of the southwest wall, connecting the western end of the River Row to the tourney grounds outside the city walls by the Blackwater Rush. During the Dance of the Dragon, it was one of the gates captured by Sir Perkin the Flea on behalf of Trystane Truefire during the Moon of Madness. Like the River Gate, it was then improved by Sir Tyrion Lannister during the reign of King Aegon III, to prevent it from being attacked from within the city. During the Battle of the Blackwater, it was the second most important location to defend due to its location near the Blackwater Rush. It was assaulted by Stannis' men, but the River Gate was the main focal point of the attack, thus the King's Gate was much more easily defended. The Gate of the Gods is located at the western corner of the walls of King's Landing. The King's Road enters the city from the north at the Gate of the Gods. The gate can be seen from the Broken Anvil, a famous inn near the city walls. There are detailed carving of the Seven, on the gatehouse and over the portcullis, with eyes that seemed to follow you as you entered the gate. During the Dance of the Dragons, the gate did not fall during the Mood of Madness or during the riots, but after the black victory by the lads at the Battle of the King's Road, the lads met with Lord Corlys Velaryon and Aegon the Younger outside the gate for peace talks before entering the city. During the regency of King Aegon III in 135 AC, the commander of the City Watch, Sir Lucas Lagood, was implicated in a plot against the wife of Prince Viserys, Lara Roger. When men came to arrest him, Sir Lucas refused to go meekly and was killed along with 8 others in a savage fight at the Gate of the God. The Dragon Gate is located at the northern corner of the city walls near Rhaenys' Hill. Like the other gates, during the Dance of the Dragons, massive riots broke out in the city prior to the Moon of Madness. The captain of the Old Gate and the Dragon Gate, Sir Balon Birch and Sir Garth the Harelip, managed to sally out and restore some semblance of order to the streets north and east of Rhaenys' Hill. While it was a short peace, it was enough time for Queen Rhaenyra and her small escort to flee the city via the Dragon Gate. After the War of the Five Kings in the main books, we also know that the captain of the Dragon Gate, Humphrey Waters, is named the new Lord Commander at the City Watch of King's Landing. The Iron Gate is located on the northeast wall of the city and connects the Rosby Road heading northeast to Rosby along Blackwater Bay. It shares a similar role to the other gates during the Dance of the Dragons, the key difference being the captain of the gate, Sir Medric Manderley, sallied out and restored some order to the area northeast of Aegon's Hill, to the Iron Gate. Janos Slynt, who is a Lord Commander of the Gold Cloaks at the start of the main books, was captain of the Iron Gate when he was promoted to Lord Commander by the hand of the King, Jon Arryn, after the death of the old commander, Manly Stokeworth. We also learn during the War of Five Kings, Tyrion Lannister has his lover, Shae, hidden in a manse near the Iron Gate. During the Battle of the Blackwater, mobs fight to escape the city at the Iron Gate and Gate of the Gods. After deserting the battle, Sandor Clegane considers also leaving through the Iron Gate. The Old Gate is the gate we know least about. It's located near the centre of the northwestern wall, near Rhaenys' Hill. The only unique part of its history comes during the early stages of the Dance of the Dragons. Lord Staunton's head was taken to King's Landing after the Battle of Rook's Rest and mounted above the Old Gate. The King's Pavilion was close by the water, and the morning mist of the river wreathed it in wisps of grey. The Thoughts of Eddard Stark, A Game of Thrones Chapter 30, Eddard 7. The Blackwater Rush is arguably one of the most important parts of the city of King's Landing, and yet is often greatly overlooked due to it being a natural formation of the environment that predates the city itself. But in the same way the 3 hills of King's Landing were vital to the city's development, so too was the Blackwater Rush, with it likely being one of the key reasons Aegon the Conqueror chose this very site for his landing, and to build his capital city from. But what makes the Rush stand out among the other rivers in Westeros is how many kingdoms it travels through, and the way in which it ties these kingdoms together. It passes through the southern riverlands, the northern reach, the Crownlands, with some headwaters in the Westerlands as well. It's a river that unites the east and west of the Seven Kingdoms. It is believed that the Blackwater Rush's headwaters lie near Stony Sept, with the river flowing southeast and is joined by 2 tributaries, one east of Stony Sept and one from the God's Eye. King's Landing itself is situated at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, where the Blackwater Rush empties into Blackwater Bay, with the river gate opening onto the banks of the Rush, with many wharves and docks for ships from across the known world. As rivers go, the Blackwater Rush is said to be very deep, with currents that are unpredictable and treacherous, them at their strongest at the mouth of the Rush itself. It is not uncommon for swimmers to drown in the waters of the river, thanks to these strong currents. While the Rush is wide at its mouth, for the most part it is quite narrow, an estimated 1/5 of the width of the Rhoyne River in Essos. Tyrion glanced back to where the Rush emptied out into Blackwater Bay, and was relieved to see no sign of sails on the wide green horizon. The Thoughts of Tyrion Lannister, A Clash of Kings, Chapter 41, Tyrion 9. For much of the history of the Blackwater Rush, and specifically the area around its mouth, it has been claimed by several different petty kingdoms, including the Darklands of Duskendale, the Massies of Stonedance, and many of the River Kings of the Riverlands, including the lights from House Mud, Fisher, Bracken, Blackwood and Hood, with King Benedict II Justman successfully holding the area for an extended period of time. Immediately prior to Aegon's conquest of Westeros, the area around the northern bank of the Blackwater Rush was claimed by the Storm King Argilac Durridon, with the southern bank by Harren the Black, the king of the Isles and Rivers, with both kings disputing the other's claim over the area. After Aegon landed at the bank of the river, he would build the Aegofort as his foothold in Westeros to launch his invasion from, with him now claiming the Blackwater Rush as part of his domain and that of House Targaryen for the first time, with the city of King's Landing growing around the Aegofort and thus the Blackwater Rush itself. It's likely the defensive security and trade the Blackwater Rush offered King's Landing is a factor in why this small fishing village grew into the largest city in Westeros in a historical blink of an eye. During the early stages of the development of King's Landing, a sunken cog on the banks of the river was used as a makeshift sept until a proper one could be built. Even this new sept would be a simple wattle and daub construction located on the shores of the Rush until the High Septon would sponsor the building of a proper stone sept up top Visenya's Hill. Because King's Landing grew too quickly, it never developed a proper waste management system or infrastructure. Thus, by the early reign of King Jaehaerys Targaryen, in around 57 AC, the river water had become so polluted it was not fit to be drunk even by horses, let alone a person. It was Septon Bath who proposed a system of pipes and wells be built to deliver fresh water to King's Landing from further upriver. The river would play a minor role in the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen Civil War fought between the years 129 and 131 AC. After yielding Harrenhal to the Greens, Prince Daemon Targaryen and his dragon Caraxes followed the Blackwater downstream from the God's Eye to participate in the fall of King's Landing. After the Dance of the Dragons had ended, it is believed that Princess Baelor Targaryen enjoyed moonlight swims in the powerful river, despite how dangerous this was, something that would later come to prominence in 133 AC, when Lady Buckler and her daughters drowned en route to the Maiden Days Ball when their boat sank in the Blackwater. Sometime prior to the First Blackfyre Rebellion, King Daeron II granted land near the bank of the Blackwater to his half-brother, Daemon Blackfyre. It's unknown exactly where this land was situated, other than it was close to King's Landing. It is assumed, given the timescale involved, that Daemon never actually built a keep on this land. In the year 265 AC, displeased with King's Landing, King Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King, once considered building a shadow city of marble on the southern shore of the river, but this was never going to be a realistic possibility. A wall of red-hot steel, blazing wood and swirling green flames stretched before him. The mouth of the Blackwater Rush had turned into the mouth of hell. Davos Seaworth's thoughts. A Clash of Kings, Chapter 58, Davos 3. The Blackwater Rush plays a huge role during the main book series, specifically during A Clash of Kings. Catelyn Stark crosses the Blackwater Rush several times while en route from Riverrun to Bitterbridge to treat with Renly Baratheon, and then again on the way back. Later, after being stopped at the Red Fork in the Battle of the Fords, Tywin Lannister joins with Mathis Rowan and Randall Tarly near the headwaters of the Blackwater. At Tumble's Fall, they meet Lord Mace Tyrell, who has brought barges and a large host with him. From there, they can float down the Blackwater and land half a day's ride outside of King's Landing. Later, during the Battle of the Blackwater, many of the ships of Joffrey Baratheon and his uncle Stannis Baratheon's fleet are set ablaze by wildfire after a great chain divides the river from the Blackwater Bay. The rush appears to be on fire thanks to the wildfire, as Stannis' men are pushed back into the river. Podrick Payne, meanwhile, knocks the armoured Sir Madden Moore into the river water to save Tyrion Lannister, as the Lannister and Tyrell army attacks Stannis' from the rear and forces the retreat. The impact the river has on trade can be seen during the War of Five Kings, as demonstrated in A Storm of Swords. The area in the immediate vicinity of Stony Sept, and thus the headwaters of the Rush, did suffer greatly during the war, but by some fortune the harvest had not yet been burned south of the river, and trading was still possible with King's Landing. It was also noted that in the wake of the Battle of the Blackwater, some have taken to piracy upon the river. We don't believe this has happened before. The battle left its mark, with there being countless sunken ships blocking the entrance in and out of the mouth of the river. Thus the time-consuming task of removing the husk of the ships needed to be done. Things are so bad, only a single flat-bottom ferry can take passengers from one side of the river to the other. The blockage of the Rush has been impacting trade in the city. King's Landing, as we well know, is the newest and largest of the 5 cities of Westeros, and in comparison grew very quickly. Thus, while the original layout of King's Landing was a confusing mess of unorganised alleys and streets, crossing like a maze. Hence, why King Jaehaerys I, from 42 AC during the early part of his reign, invested huge amounts of his own time and money into completely redeveloping the city into what is recognisably the King's Landing we see today. Much of the city was torn down, and the streets widened, and some even had cobblestones laid to replace the thick mud and dirt they had before. Care was even taken to make these new streets somewhat pleasant, with the inclusion of lots of greenery and trees, and in some places even stone statues and works of art. Some of Queen Alysanne's clean drinking water fountains would be placed along these new streets. The new King's Landing would have 7 main streets that would become the lifeblood of the city, as well as several other ways, which proved as a means of getting across the city quickly. It seems like 7 streets in particular were built much like the 7 gates of King's Landing. However, it is also very possible that it was all just a coincidence. Again, whether intentional or not, these streets would become the focus of the key trades of the city, and it was via these trades most of the streets would get their names. Ned turned off the square where the Street of Steel began and followed its winding path up a long hill, past blacksmiths working at open forges, free riders haggling over mail shirts, and grizzled ironmongers selling old blades and razors from their wagons. The further they climbed, the larger the buildings grew. The Thoughts of Eddard Stark, A Game of Thrones Chapter 27, Eddard 6. The Street of Steel begins on the southwest corner of Fishmonger Square and climbs up Visenya's Hill until the Great Sept of Baelor. Most smiths of the capital have their forges on the street, with it commonly said that the higher up the street one goes, the more expensive the shops. At its top is the shop of Tobo Mott, one of the more famous smiths in the city during the later reign of King Robert Baratheon. Tobo Mott's shop is made of timber and plaster and is larger than all the other buildings on the Street of Steel. Upper stories tower over the street below, and Tobo lives above his shop. The double doors have ebony and weirwood carvings of hunting scenes. 2 stone knights, armoured in red suits of armour in the shapes of a griffin and unicorn, guard the entrance. Tobo employs a slim serving girl in his house, as well as several apprentices. While it is one of the more expensive locations, it does give us an idea of what the rest of the street may look like. This location is key, just prior to the death of Robert Baratheon. Investigating the death of Jon Arryn, Lord Eddard Stark, the Hand of the King, visits the shop, like his predecessors, where he found one of the king's bastard children, a boy named Gendry, working as a smith's apprentice. It's believed that both Jon Arryn and Stannis Baratheon had also visited the shop and saw Gendry. The legendary head knight Sir Duncan the Tall once said he saw Brendan Rivers, known as Blood Raven, and his raven's teeth walk up the Street of Steel, with Rivers leaving a lasting impression on the then young Duncan. Look under every bed. You know how fond my brother is of brothels. Sir Jaime Lannister to Adam Marbrand. A Feast for Crows Chapter 8, Jaime 1. The Street of Silk is located on the Hill of Rhaenys leading up to the Dragonpit by the west. The street is known mostly for its brothels of varying expense, including the likes of Shatire's brothel, the Blue Pearl, and Mother's. There is a secret tunnel from Shatire's brothel to the Red Keep that was dug for an unspecific Hand of the King. Tyrion Lannister would later make use of this tunnel when visiting his secret mistress Shae during the War of 5 Kings. The brothel is a favourite of Robert Baratheon. He fathered a bastard girl on one of the whores who works there, whose mother called her Barra. The babe was killed shortly after the death of King Robert. Lord Stannis Baratheon and Jon Arryn visited Shatire's brothel when trying to identify bastards fathered by Robert, and they likely saw Barra. The earliest reference we have to the street comes during the early reign of King Jaehaerys, with his Pentoshi Master of Coin Rhaego Draz living in a manse located on the street rather than staying inside the Red Keep. which would have been the norm. It would also become infamous during the later reign of King Jaehaerys for being the location for the death of one of his younger daughters, Princess Visera, before departing King's Landing to marry old Lord Theomore Manderley in White Harbour. Princess Visera visited the brothels on the Street of Silk with her companions for one last night of laughter. She died that night in a drunken horse race, breaking her neck when she fell from her mount. Given the drunken nature of the street, deaths of both high and low-born tend to be common. Prince Daemon Targaryen, the brother of King Viserys I, was known to regularly frequent the street, something that became a near-daily occurrence during his time as Lord Commander of the City Watch. He was in one of the brothels when he referred to his short-lived nephew, Baelor Targaryen, as heir for a day, which resulted in the wrath of his brother and his exile. The courtful Mushroom claims Daemon once smuggled his niece, Rhaenyra Targaryen, to the Street of Silk to observe the whores at work. Daemon's paramour, Missaria, was known to have been a dancing girl in King's Landing. It is likely she worked in one of the brothels along the Street of Silk. According to Mushroom, King Aegon II fathered a bastard boy on a girl whose maidenhood he won at an auction in 123 AC. But much like a lot of Mushroom's tales, it's hard to tell fact from fiction. However, something that does add some credence to Mushroom's claim is that later, during the final weeks of the Dance of the Dragons, amidst the riots at King's Landing, a boy named Gaemon Palehair, who was claimed to be the bastard of King Aegon II, was raised up as king by whores at a brothel on the Street of Silk, during a period of time that became known as the Moon of Madness. His supporters were based out of the House of Kisses atop Rhaenys' Hill. Much like with the gates of King's Landing, with some of the main streets of the city, we don't really know much about their history, other than really their location and one or two key events that happened there. The Street of Flies, despite its repugnant name, is in fact where most of the meat within King's Landing is traded, and thus is the location for most of the butchers in the city. We know this because on the feast day of our Father above in 133 AC, Lord Unwin Peake, the Hand of the King for King Aegon III during the Regency, had the dungeons of the keep emptied of all offenders, where he punished them publicly. There were so many prisoners the King's Justice Sir Victor Risley was aided in his task by Tissario the Tiger and his fingers. The courtful Mushroom describes the event as looking more like a butchery than an execution, and noted that Lord Unwin should have sent for the butchers from the Street of Flies instead of the Hand's Fingers. The Street of Looms is thought to be one of the poorest areas of King's Landing. One of the few times we see the street, Tyrion Lannister sees a dead body being eaten by crows. We believe the Street of Looms is where much of the textiles of King's Landing are produced and sold. The next street, the Street of Seed, is one of the streets we know next to nothing about. However, some speculate its name implies it could focus on the trading of farming and agricultural goods, or perhaps fresh fruits and vegetables brought into the city from nearby farmland. During the events of A Storm of Swords, Jaime Lannister, while travelling down the street, sees a begging brother, a sort of religious beggar, who's often doing so as a form of penance. This beggar was praying for the recently deceased Joffrey Baratheon. It is thought that originally the Street of Silver was supposed to act as a sort of financial district for Jaehaerys' vision of King's Landing, but it is very much clear that by the time of the main book series, this certainly is not the case, with it being one of the roughest areas of the city, famous for its many gambling dens. During the events of A Clash of Kings, Sir Jacelyn Bywater, the commander of the Gold Cloaks, reports to Tyrion Lannister that Timett, son of Timett, one of Tyrion's clansmen from the Vale, killed a wine seller's son at a gambling den on the Street of Silver. The Street of the Sisters is one of 4 straight streets which start at an unnamed great square at the very centre of King's Landing. The street connects to the Great Sept of Baelor atop Visenya's Hill to the Dragonpit atop the Hill of Rhaenys, and thus why the street is named the Sisters. It is also the location of the Guild Hall of the Alchemists. It is believed that at some point during her youth, Baelor Targaryen took part in a drunken horse race down the street. The street seems to be a common place for horse racing, as we know of many occasions where it happens. For instance, in the build-up to the Hand's Tourney towards the end of King Robert's reign, there were countless drunken races. While these are the main 7 streets of the city, there are 3 other large streets known as ways. Unlike the streets, the ways don't tend to focus on a specific trade and are wider, designed more as a means of traversing the city quickly. This is helped by the fact, for the most part, these ways are straight, going from one end of the city to the central square. These ways are often connected to each other and other key streets of the city by many other smaller squares. The Street of the Sisters technically also functions as a way. The God's Way starts at the unnamed Great Square at the centre of King's Landing, leading northeast to the Gate of the Gods. The King's Way leads from the same central square towards the Red Keep, hence the name Kingsway. The Shepherd's Way runs eastward from Cobbler's Square up to the Dragonpit, atop the Hill of Rhaenys. Wildfire is but one of the dreaded secrets of our ancient order. Many and wondrous are the things that we might show you. Hailing to Tyrion Lannister, A Clash of Kings Chapter 20, Tyrion 5. The Guild Hall of the Alchemists is home to the Alchemists Guild of King's Landing. While their order is very old, it is also small. While most members practice pyromancy, the guild does not exclusively practice this art. A full member of the Alchemist Guild is called a Wisdom. We have no record of where this naming scheme comes from, but it is assumed they likely came from the people who used the guild in ancient days, appealing to the alchemists' wisdom. The guild, while distinctly different than the maesters of the Citadel of Old Town, does have some similarities. For example, most full members also have apprentices and acolytes to assist them. The guild was powerful in its early years, and they once claimed to be able to transmute metal, for example, turning scrap iron into gold. However, by the time of the reign of King Robert Baratheon, their abilities and influence have greatly diminished. Now only a few older men remain, with few younger men joining to carry on the teachings of the guild. Although they still might possess vast secret tomes of knowledge, the guild only currently demonstrates the skill to create wildfire. Hence, why many of the small folk of King's Landing have simply taken to calling them the Pyromancers Guild. The wildfire is created within the guild's headquarters, located on the Street of the Sister, closer to the Visenia's Hill. The hall is an imposing labyrinth of cold black stone. Great care is taken when producing wildfire. Above each cell is a room filled with sand. The floor below has protective enchantments placed upon it. Any fire within the cell will cause both floors to fall and sand to drop, smothering the fire instantly. Trained acolytes prepare the product in bare stone cells, and once a jar is ready, it is immediately removed by apprentices and brought to one of their many secret vaults. The substance was the pyromancer's own term for wildfire. They called each other wisdoms as well, which Tyrion found almost as annoying as their custom of having the vast secret stores of knowledge that they wanted him to think they possessed. Once theirs had been a powerful guild, but in recent centuries the maesters of the Citadel had supplanted the alchemists almost everywhere. Now only a few of the older order remain, and they no longer even pretend to transmute metals, but they could make wildfire. The Thoughts of Tyrion Lannister, The Clash of Kings Chapter 20, Tyrion 5. While the Alchemist Guild itself is assumed to be at least as old as King's Landing, this appears not to be the case. Several times it's described as an ancient guild, with Archmaester Gildane suggesting the organisation was supplanted by the Maesters of the Citadel, with near on every keep in the Seven Kingdoms having its own Maester. This may suggest that some form of the guild existed before the founding of King's Landing, and may even be older than the Maesters of the Citadel themselves. More evidence to this is the fact that for the first 170 years of Targaryen rule in Westeros, it seems House Targaryen had little use for the guild or its wildfire. Why would they need it if they had the power of dragons at their disposal? Things seem to have changed after the Dance of the Dragons, between 129 and 131 AC, which is when the power of House Targaryen weakened significantly, with near on all their dragons dead as a result, with a few they had left remaining dying in the years after. With the loss of the power that dragons gave House Targaryen, some kings began to look towards the wildfire of the guilds to fill that void. The first attempt came during the reign of King Aegon IV, between the years 172 and 183 AC. Aegon dreamed of bringing dawn into his realm via conquest, and commanded the guild build him new dragons. Thus, the pyromancers constructed hide dragon-shaped devices fitted with pumps that shot out jets of wildfire, With his new dragons ready, Aegon would march on dawn, but he only made it as far as the Kingswood south of the Blackwater Rush, when one of his dragons went up in flames, which quickly spread to the other 6 devices. All 7 were destroyed, and an estimated quarter of the forest burned with them. Aegon abandoned his invasion, and never rebuilt his dragons. It is assumed that with the failure of the dragons, the guild was left out in the cold once again, until a new use for their skills could be found. The blood of the dragon gathered in 7 eggs to honour the 7 gods, though the king's own septon had warned. Pyromancers, wildfire, flames grew out of control, towering and burning so hot that, die, but for the valour of the Lord Commander. The burned remains of a letter written by Maester Corso regarding the tragedy at Summerhall. A world of ice and fire, the reign of King Aegon V. During the reign of King Daeron II and the early reign of King Aerys I, in the years 109 and 110 AC, the Great Spring Sickness struck King's Landing. The death toll was so high in King's Landing that it was taking far too long to collect the bodies and burn the remains of the dead, only emboldening the spreading of the disease. Brendan Rivers, Bloodraven, the hand of the king to King Aerys, ordered that all of the dead be brought to the ruins of the Dragonpit on the hill of Rhaenys. The bodies were said to be piled several feet high, and the smell was unbearable. The pyromancers used wildfire to burn the dead in huge pyres like had never been seen before. Over the next few days, the light of the wildfire pyres could be seen as a dark green glow throughout King's Landing during the night and even into the day. But it appears at some stage they lost control of the pyre and a significant portion of the city burned as a result. Given the events of Aegon IV's new dragons and the pyres in the Dragonpit, it appears while the guild was good at making wildfire, they certainly had trouble controlling it. Sometime during 194 AC, Prince Aerion Targaryen, Aerion Brightflame, the son of the future King Maekar Targaryen, drank a jug of wildfire, believing that it would turn him into a dragon. It only served to burn him to death. How Aerion got the wildfire is not known. However, it is assumed someone from the guild had given it to him. At the end of the reign of King Aegon V, in the year 259 AC, the king would gather his whole family at the Targaryen palace of Summerhall in the Dornish Marches to celebrate the coming birth of his first grandchild, Rhaegar Targaryen. But there would be a terrible fire that would destroy the palace and kill most of the royal family, the king included. While we cannot know for sure what happened inside the walls of Summerhall, it is believed that the pyromancers of the guild were involved in some capacity. It has strongly been suggested that King Aegon V used the event to try and hatch dragon eggs with wildfire involved in the process. Let him be king over charred bones and cooked meat. Let him be king of the ashes. The Mad King Aerys II, to Wisdom Rosart, A Clash of Kings, Chapter 48, Daenerys 4. The Alchemists enjoyed a period of increased influence during the reign of King Aerys II Targaryen, visiting his court more frequently as the king's fascination with wildfire increased, along with his deepening madness. When Aerys tasked the pyromancers with driving off the winter at the start of 282 AC, they burned wildfire along the walls of the Red Keep for well over a moon's turn. For once, however, it does seem they were able to control the wildfire. Later during that year, Aerys was very much now the Mad King that has now become legend. He began using wildfire to burn traitors, murderers and plotters. When Brandon Stark had come to the Red Keep demanding the return of his sister, Lyanna Stark, by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Aerys had him and his companions arrested for treason and summoned Lord Rickard Stark to court. Aerys viewed Brandon's threats as treasonous and thus offered Rickard trial by combat. Lord Stark accepted, only for Aerys to name fire his champion. Rickard burned to death as countless in the throne room looked on. Wisdom Rosart, the Grand Master of the Guild, supervised the executions, and while the king rewarded him with the title of Lord and added him to his small council in a non-specific role, the power of Rosart would only grow further in the months to come. The execution of Rickard and Brandon Stark would then directly lead to Robert's rebellion. During the rebellion, King Aerys tasked Rosart and 2 other pyromancers, Gargis and Bellis, were creating a vast quantities of wildfire for his plan to destroy King's Landing should the war be lost. When Hand of the King, Carlton Chelstead, opposed Aerys' plan and renounced his duties in disgust, the Mad King had him burned to death with wildfire and named Rhaegar his next and final hand. This was ultimately one of the reasons why Sir Jaime Lannister would kill both Rhaegar and King Aerys during the sack of King's Landing to prevent its destruction. Days after the sack, he hunted down Gargius and Bellis and killed them as well. This was not the end of the guild, however. Though much of the skill needed to make wildfire was lost, by war's end, there was still vast quantities of wildfire hidden throughout King's Landing that needed to be removed. The few acolytes who remained at the guild were inexperienced in destroying the wildfire, thus some jars remained in vaults of the guild, while others were lost and forgotten about. By the time of the main books, during a clash of kings, the alchemists find a cache of 200 jars of wildfire under the Great Sept of Baelor in the year 298, and then a further cache under the Dragonpit. During the War of Five Kings, Queen Regent Cersei Lannister commissions 10,000 jars of wildfire for the defences of King's Landing. Tyrion Lannister, the acting hand of the king, meets with Wisdom Hallin in the Guild Hall of the Alchemists. Hallin later reports an unexplained increase in the effectiveness of their spells, noting that it has not been as easy since the time of dragons. Unbeknownst to them at the time, Daenerys Targaryen had just hatched 3 living dragons. The wildfire would later go on to play a key role during the defence of King's Landing from an attack by Stannis Baratheon, whose fleet was destroyed on the Rush by boats filled with wildfire. During the wedding feast of King Joffrey Baratheon and Margaery Tyrell, 4 pyromancers entertained by conjuring beasts of living flame. Later, Lord Helene and his guild of alchemists are employed by Cersei to burn down the Tower of the Hand after the death of Tywin Lannister. Brothels and their ilk are a surprisingly important part of the income of a large city like King's Landing due to the sheer amount of gold that flows through them, and thus there tends to be establishments that cater to all kinds of tastes and budgets, to the poorest of small folk, to kings themselves. Every city in Westeros has them, even smaller towns and villages, from the sands of Dawn to the wild north, but nowhere else in Westeros has as many as King's Landing. So much so that one of the largest streets in the city is dedicated to the profession, the Street of Silk, home to the finest and most grim pillow houses in the whole city. While most are located on the Street of Silk, there are also countless smaller establishments all over King's Landing, with many located in the slums of Flea Bottom. But most alehouses and wine sinks throughout King's Landing also tend to attract independent working girls, with it common for serving girls to act in this role. Outside of the Street of Silk, there are 1 or 2 other high-profile locations, mostly around the docks just outside the Rivergate, establishments often frequented by merchants and traders who have just made landfall. By the time of the main book series, there are arguably 3 notable pillow houses in King's Landing, with key figures, such as the Master of Coin, Peter Baelish, owning several establishments throughout the city. It is never pleasant to lance a boil, Grandmaster Elisar wrote of the affair. You never know how much pus will come out, or how badly it will smell. The pus that bursts forth from the Blue Pearl would smell very bad indeed. The writings of Archmaester Gildane, Fire and Blood, The Long Reign, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, Policy, Progeny, and Pain. Of the 4 named pillar houses in King's Landing that we know of, 3 of them are either very minor or we know very little about them, other than the key role they play in the history of the city. The first of these pillar houses is known as the Blue Pearl. It seems the Pearl was one of the more reputable establishments on the Street of Silk, and often frequented by minor lords and knights. While not necessarily the nicest the street has to offer, clearly, it is not the worst. It became infamous in 84 AC during the scandal of the 9th-born daughter of King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, Princess Sarah Targaryen. 2 men of the City Watch found Tom Turnip, the fool of King Jaehaerys, surrounded by whores at the Blue Pearl, as well as Sir Braxton Breezebury, Lord Roy Coddington, and Jonah Mouton, all 3 the male favourites of Princess Sarah Targaryen. Coddington would later admit that they thought it would be funny to see the fool do the deed, and Jonah Mouton said the prank had been Sarah's idea. Needless to say, the escapade would have far-reaching consequences for the likes of Sarah herself, but also all those involved in it. Additionally, according to one of Sarah's friends, Alice Turnberry, Sir Braxton Beesbury is said to have fathered a bastard daughter on a whore at the Blue Pearl. However, the only indication we have of this is Alice's testimony, with Beesbury never acknowledging this himself when questioned. During the early regency of King Aegon III, we know of another pillow house, supposedly in the lower end of the Street of Silk, among the cheaper establishments, known as Mothers, run by a woman simply going by the name of Mother. The girls employed there are referred to as Mother's daughters. During the wake of the Dance of the Dragons, the former Grand Maester Orwyle, who had escaped imprisonment, hid and worked in the brothel during this period under the alias of Old Will, until he was later discovered and recaptured. We also know of one other pillow house that is not located on the Street of Silk, but rather next to the river gate and the docks beside the Blackwater Rush. The Mermaid was said to be one of the most high-class pillow houses ever to grace King's Landing. It was owned by Rogerio Roger, of House Roger of Lys. This time in history is known as the Lycene Spring, as many members of House Roger held positions of power during the regency of King Aegon III, after Rogerio's elder sister, Lara Roger, married Prince Viserys Targaryen, later King Viserys II. The Mermaid really stood out among the other pillow houses of King's Landing. It was an opulent establishment, full of exotic animals such as parrots from the Summer Isles and monkeys from Sithorios. All spoke of the beauties and wonders in the Mermaid, and some even claimed that the brothel had a real mermaid within. Rogerio charged 10 times more for his exotic prostitutes, who originated from all across the known world. Rogerio opened the brothel in 134 AC, and the establishment never lacked for customers and was always busy, mainly with high lords, knights, and rich merchants. Tisario the Tiger, one at the hand of the king, Sir Unwin Peake's fingers, was banned from the Mermaid by Rogerio when he hit one of the girls. During the end of the Lycene Spring in 135 AC, Sir Marsden Waters of the Kingsguard arrested Rogerio at the Mermaid when House Roger was accused of treason. After being released, Rogerio sold the brothel and everything in it to purchase a giant cog, which he named the Mermaid's Daughter. The cog entertained patrons while travelling from port to port in the Narrow Sea. The ship also traded in spices and exotic wines and is said to have made Rogerio a very rich man. Show me a few of your girls. It will be a great delight. You will find that they are all sweet as they are beautiful, and skilled in every art of love. Tyrion Lannister and Shattire. A Clash of Kings, Chapter 15, Tyrion 3. By the time of the main book series, Shattire's brothel, or Shattire's as it's known by most, is by far the most reputable and famous pillow house in all of King's Landing, with its reputation even being known across Westeros and into the free cities of Essos. It is an upscale brothel on the Street of Silk in King's Landing, and sits at the top of the Street of Silk, where most of the expensive pillow houses are located. It is owned and run by Shattire. Her girls are costly and dress in flowing silk clinched at the waist with beaded belts. Shattire herself is said to be tall, elegant, and a dignified woman who came from the Summer Isles. She had ebon skin and sandalwood-coloured eyes. Her voice is smooth and resonates with an accent of the Summer Isles. Following the belief of the Summer Islanders, Shattire feels that there is no shame in prostitution, and that people honour the gods with their bodies and their desires. The brothel is 2 stories tall, with a stone ground floor and a timber upper floor. Many of the windows are leaded and have ornate stained glass designs. Over the door swings an ornate lamp of gilded metal and scarlet glass. Inside the entrance, the air smells of exotic spices from across the world. Its floors display a mosaic of 2 women entwined in love. The common room is behind an ornate mirrorish screen that has been carved with flowers and dreaming maidens. The common room itself has a cushioned alcove and a leaded-coloured glass window where sunlight pours through. Often there is musicians playing music within the common room. A round turret rises from one corner of the house. The turret room is located up 2 flights of stairs from the ground floor, then down a long hall up another stairs to a lone door which opens to the turret room. Within the room is a great canopied bed, a tall wardrobe decorated with erotic carvings, and a narrow window of leaded glass in a pattern of red and yellow diamonds. Inside the turret room's empty wardrobe is a back panel concealing a secret passageway. When the back panel is pushed aside, it reveals a metal ladder whose rungs go well below street level. The shaft then opens up into a dark, slanting earthen tunnel. Having come perhaps a distance of 3 blocks under the Hill of Rhaenys, a patron will then emerge through the trapdoor at the back of the nearby stables. How is it a brothel happens to have a secret entrance? The tunnel was dug for another king's hand, whose honour would not allow him to enter such a house openly. Shattire has closely guarded the knowledge of its existence. Tyrion Lannister and Varys, A Clash of Kings Chapter 15, Tyrion 3. During the events of A Game of Thrones, the Pillow House plays a minor role. One of the whores has Barra, a bastard daughter of King Robert Baratheon. During his search for the king's bastards, Lord Eddard Stark finds the child and her mother at Shattire's brothel. It then goes on to play a huge role during the events of A Clash of Kings, where Queen Cersei Lannister decides to erase any clue of her adultery and has Barra and her mother killed by men of the City Watch under the command of Aladdin. Tyrion Lannister later visits Shattire's as a front for his secret visitations with Shae at a manse located nearby. When he enters the common room, he sees an older man playing music on pipes and girls playing tiles near a window. Shattire's daughter shows Tyrion how to access the secret tunnel from the turret room, and Varys escorts him beneath Rhaenys' hill, where Tyrion then rides from a nearby stable directly to Shae's manse. Tyrion returns to the brothel on several occasions. During one visit, a patron attempts to spit on Tyrion, but the spittle instead lands on Tyrion's companion, Bronn, who knocks out the patron's teeth. On another occasion, Bronn goes off with a girl from Dorne. The War of Five Kings has led Shattire to offer a poor vintage of wine, which has displeased her greatly. Tyrion often considers bringing King Joffrey to the brothel so he can enjoy the girls. Fearing that Tyrion plots against Joffrey, Cersei threatens Tyrion by having one of the girls from Shattire's taken as a hostage, as she mistakenly believes that this prostitute is Tyrion's lover instead of Shae. Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, master of coin for most of the main books, owns several pillow houses across King's Landing. However, we know little about them or their location. However, during the events of Game of Thrones, he does hide Catelyn Stark when she travels to King's Landing after the attack on Bran Stark with the Catswold dagger in one of his brothels. Littlefinger, after the death of King Robert and the imprisonment of Eddard Stark, would hide the friend of Sansa Stark, Jane Paul, in one of his pillow houses. There is some implication that he intended to put her to work while she was there.